Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill to amend the South Carolina Code of Laws by adding Chapter 42 to Title 44 as to define gender, sex, and other terms, to prohibit the provision of gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age, to provide exceptions to prohibit the use of public funds for gender transition procedures, and to provide penalties, and by adding Section 59-32-36 so as to prohibit public school staff and officials from withholding knowledge of a minor's perception of their gender from the minor's parents, among other things.
Thank you, Trey, for that. We have Representative John McCravey to review the bill with us today, and would also recognize Representative Hyatt for sponsoring that bill, Davey Hyatt. McCravey, appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there are a few things we do as legislators that are more important than protecting vulnerable children. One of those important legislative protections that has come to pass is to protect minors from so-called gender transition procedures. 22 states, including every state surrounding South Carolina, which includes North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, and Kentucky, have already passed this proposed legislation. First, what this bill does, the first thing it does is protect minors from the use of hormone drugs known as puberty blockers. These drugs block the normal puberty hormones released by the body that cause normal development of a child's reproductive organs. Growing evidence shows that puberty blockers are not safe and result in irreversible physical, not to mention emotional damage. The FDA has warned that this carries a risk of a rare condition called pseudotumor cerebri that can cause swelling of the optic nerve, headache, vomiting, elevated blood pressure, paralysis. Also, because they prevent the natural development of reproductive organs, the Endocrine Society has warned that there's a lack of data on whether the use of these drugs may result in a greater incidence of infertility. Researchers in the UK are now concerned about the negative effects on the brain itself from these drugs. And numerous studies have already proved that puberty blockers seriously diminish bone density of children. The second thing this bill does is protect minors from the irreversible effects of cross-sex hormones. This is where a biological girl, for instance, may be given testosterone, or a biological boy is given estrogen. Extended use of cross-sex hormones will sterilize a child for life. They damage the testes in males and the ovarian function in females. 3 different studies show that cross-sex hormones carry an increased risk of stroke, blood clots, and other cardiovascular issues, and this damage is irreversible. The third thing this bill does is protect minors from radical and irreversible surgeries, and it's all tied together. The facts are that 98% of children who receive puberty blockers go on to get the cross-sex hormones, and then that 97% of those go on to have irreversible surgeries. And the sad part is, the fact is that when left alone, 85 to 90% of young people with gender dysphoria return to identify with their biological sex by adulthood. It's also a fact that approximately 60% regret their choice later when they go through with these procedures. You know, you might have seen this on 60 Minutes. Just go back and look at the 60 Minutes documentary they did on this a couple of years ago. The bill is medically sound. It's been reviewed by medical experts and contains extensive exceptions for any congenital abnormalities, as well as certain developmental disorders and procedures needed, and certainly any procedures needed by injury that would place a person at risk for impairment or serious bodily function or death. Mr. Chairman, this summarizes the bill, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. McCravy. We appreciate that introduction. Committee members, are there any questions at this point for Representative McCravy before we get into public hearing, and then we'll have a very robust discussion at the end as well? Please recognize Representative J.A. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCravy, how are you?
I'm doing great.
I had just a few, you were putting out a lot of stats there, so I just want some clarification. So you quoted, you used the language "not safe," and then you went on to say that the FDA said, can you repeat the thing about the FDA as it relates to brain damage?
Yes, the FDA has warned that these drugs, the puberty blockers, carry a risk of causing that pseudotumor cerebri that I mentioned that has, that's a severe disease. It's something that nobody wants.
And then the 60% regret rate that you mentioned, what was the source of that?
I believe there are several studies out there. I've reviewed a lot of them.
The one that you were quoting.
Well, I can't. I'll give it to you after this hearing. I'll be glad to go find it for you.
So that 60% regretting quote, you don't have the source for that?
I believe it. I believe the 60 Minutes program talked about that. I'm
So
not
your
sure
source
if that
is
was the
60
study.
Minutes?
Well, I'm not sure if that was the study I read, but I know that there was one, at least one or more, and they vary. I'm not going to say that every one of them is 60%, but there's at least one or two that say 60%.
But I'm just being for clarification. You said it was a fact, but you don't have the source for that
Well,
fact.
it's a fact that there are studies that show that.
But you don't have those studies that you said.
I told you I can get them to you after this hearing. I don't want to bring out a study in the middle of a hearing and try to find it and all that, but I'll be glad to get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Members, are there any further questions, clarification for Representative McCravy? Thank you. We have many speakers that have signed up, and we're going to go right down our list, and we'll call a speaker, and then we'll let someone know who's on deck. So that means you're following up. So we'll begin. Dr. Deborah Greenhouse, if you want to start making your way forward, and Dr. Elizabeth Mack, you're on deck. Thank you for being here, and there's a button there that says press. You got to push down on it pretty hard. And we'll, again, gentle reminders on this bill. We're going 2 minutes each on this bill, and we have the timer up here as well. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. My name is Debbie Greenhouse. I am a pediatrician here in Columbia. I'm not being paid by anyone to be here today. I've been in practice for 30 years here in Columbia. I have cared for a number of children that are transgender over the years. I've seen the incredibly difficult path that these patients and their parents have had to navigate, and that is why I'm testifying strongly against Bill H-4624, a bill which would make that path even more tortuous and virtually impossible to navigate. Transgender youth have a high rate of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicidality compared to their peers. I've seen this in my practice. In fact, I cannot recall a single transgender patient who has not struggled with these problems. There is no evidence whatsoever that these high rates of mental illness are due in any way to their transgender identity. Instead, it is thought that the high rates are multifactorial, including limited availability of mental health services, limited access to experienced healthcare providers, discrimination, and social rejection. This bill will make all of those issues much worse. There have been concerns raised about medications used for young transgender children without parental involvement and consent. This does not happen. I will repeat, this does not happen. The initial treatment for young transgender children is support, counseling, and referral for mental health care for the child and the parents. The parents are fully involved in the process, and in my experience, have been supportive of their children and actively seeking the best care for them. This bill will completely shut down this process, including the referral for counseling and the counseling itself. This will deprive parents of the right to make these decisions in their child's best interest. Medications are not involved in the care of transgender youth until the age of puberty. At that time, with the full involvement of the parents and ongoing counseling, puberty blockers may be initiated to buy more time for the adolescent and allow them to grow and make more mature decisions about their identity. If these medications are stopped, puberty simply resumes. Are there potential side effects from these medications? Yes, there are.
Thank you
As
for your
there are in
testimony.
any medication whatsoever.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Before you walk away, let's see if there's any questions that the members may have. And members, again, a gentle reminder on our first testimony here this morning, we are asking questions. We are getting into any debates or allowing anything other than questions from up here. So are there any questions for the doctor at this time from any of the committee members? Very good. Thank you so much for being here. Next, Dr. Elizabeth Mack, thank you for being here. And Rebecca Bishop, you are on deck.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, my name is Elizabeth Mack. I'm a pediatric critical care physician and president of the South Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I'm here in opposition to H 4624. And there's a lot of misconception about gender-affirming care, so I really wanted to do a little myth-busting here today. Number one, there is no gender confirmation surgery occurring here in minors in South Carolina. None. So it's not of concern, and you can take it off your list of things to be worried about with our youth. There are lots of things of concern in general with our youth. That's not one. Number two, gender-affirming care, as Dr. Greenhouse said, occurs with the intense involvement of parents. Minors are not making these decisions solo. And a quote from the AAP guidelines, even when in states where minors may access care without parental consent for mental health services, contraception, STIs, parental or guardian consent is required for hormonal care of patients who identify as trans. Another concern to take off the list. Number three, half of trans kids consider suicide and a third attempt suicide because of bullying such as this and forced outing. And I see these children in the ICU. I've pronounced several dead. And we are seeing more suicidal ideation and attempts since the budget proviso passed in July 2022, disallowing care in the Low Country. And we don't have those data as many parents request and mention in the record, understandably. Number four, mental health assessment and counseling is a prerequisite of the care in children with gender dysphoria, both in practice and according to the guidelines, and this would be made illegal in this bill. To be clear, there's no such thing as a child coming in after watching a video on social media saying, I think I'm trans, and then we start them on meds. That just doesn't happen and can be taken off the list of concerns. Number five, gender-affirming care is not fringe care. It's evidence-based standard of care because it is suicide prevention care with strict guidelines intimately involving parents and caregivers. And if it becomes illegal, our trainees will need to learn this care elsewhere, and we will be at risk of malpractice. Yeah.
I think we got the volume turned up on that alarm pretty well. So we'll turn that down maybe just a tad.
Yeah.
Doctor, thank you for your testimony. And members, are there any questions for Dr. Mack at this point? Please, Representative Sessions.
Thank you for your time. You referred to some guidelines. Can you educate us? What guidelines are you referring to?
Yep, so there are several sets. They're very aligned. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, evidence-based guidelines on gender-affirming care, the WPATH guidelines, they all require parental involvement. They all require counseling from the very beginning. So they're very much aligned in those spaces. We can certainly share them with you if that's useful.
Okay. Who authors those guidelines? Do those come from, say, another national sort of medical association? You know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, there are lots of groups that make statements about gender-affirming care. There's no mainstream organization that doesn't support gender-affirming care. Then in specific reference to the guideline development, yes, those are groups of experts from those organizations that come together that provide the care, that look at the evidence in a very strict way, and they say, okay, what's good for kids and what makes sense, in terms of the family unit and how we care for kids in a very family-based way. Happy to share them again with you.
When did those guidelines, when were they produced?
The production, the very first publication, I'm not sure. The AP guidelines were just reaffirmed last year. so in 2023.
So they're addressed annually or biannually, some sort of periodic method?
Yeah, if there are major edits that occur related to the evidence that's published in the meantime, then certainly they would be revisited sooner, and then otherwise they're revisited every 5 years.
In the membership of these associations,
Yep.
all physicians?
Not all physicians, mostly pediatricians and pediatric subspecialists, over 70,000 members in the AAP.
And then do these associations or boards, do they vote to accept those guidelines, or how does that work?
So the experts discuss, they basically look at the evidence. They follow an evidence-based strategy and guideline development, which is actually very tedious, takes up a ton of time. They're all volunteers that do this. And then they come together. Certainly if there is a guideline published, then the board would have to vote, and the board does vote in support of those guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Petalino.
Hey, how are you? Is it true that the FDA has not approved puberty blockers to actually be used for gender dysphoria?
So most medications, let me just start with saying, most medications used in children do not have a label for their use. Like if I only used medicines that were on label in the ICU, I wouldn't really have any options to use. So that's not really like a comparator in pediatric medicine. And the reason for that is because there aren't a lot of studies in children, because we always start with adults first. But to get to the point, they're certainly safe, and we use them actually for a variety of indications. So endometriosis, actually in adults, various cancers, but in children, PCOS. Precocious puberty is actually probably the most common indication. Though we don't use them at this age in gender-affirming care, we can use these medicines very young in kids without concerns. And yeah, so it's a very commonly used medication, or that group of medication is very commonly used.
But it is not, correct?
What's that?
It is not FDA approved for that use though, right?
I believe that it actually is. Somebody could correct me on that. My pediatrician friend, I can check.
Okay. Follow-up question on
Yeah.
that. Is there a warning label on puberty blockers from the FDA that actually states that it increases suicidal thoughts?
No. The black box warning was related to pseudotumor cerebri, which I'm happy to explain what that is, because we see it with a lot of different medications. But no, the black box warning was related to pseudotumor.
Okay, thank you.
And that was from April of 2022.
Thank you. We're good on this end, Representative? All right. Any questions on this end, Representatives? Dr. Mack, thank you so much for being here today and
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Rebecca Bishop. And I'm going to need a little bit of help. David?
David and Rebecca Bell.
Thank you very much.
Genetic studies have identified 21 rare variants and 19 separate genes that play essential roles in pathways involved in the development of masculine or feminine brain development. The studies of twins have shown significant heritability estimates for genetic contributions to the development of gender dysphoria. A separate study has used MRI scans to investigate differences in trans female brains relative to their cisgender counterparts. The trans female brains were found to be significantly different from their cisgender male brains with a p-value of 0.0016. This highly significant p-value suggests a neuroanatomical phenotype correlated to the gender dysphoria. Since gender dysphoria has a clear biological basis, then the treatment of gender dysphoria needs to remain in the hands of medical professionals. In a well-governed, free country, access to medical treatment should not be denied if the appropriate consent can be given. By denying these children care and understanding, we are taking away their basic rights, their basic human rights as citizens in this free country, and placing them directly in harm's way. As someone who runs support groups, I have seen the harm that the denial of care and acceptance can cause. I have had teens come to me with self-harm wounds and had to intervene, and it's because of their parents denying them access and care. If we further isolate these teens by banning affirmative care across the states, we will be placing at least 3,700 self-identified transgender teens in the exact same high-emotion positions that lead to these self-harm events. And I say all of this from personal experience as well. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, in a very unaccepting family, and I began attempting suicide around the age of 12 in middle school. This battle escalated throughout my teens and early 20s, and it was having access to HRT and having affirmative care that finally put me in a position in life where I could be comfortable and happy with myself. Thank you for your time.
That's still too loud.
We're gonna continue to adjust the volume downward. And thank you for your patience. Rebecca, thank you for your testimony. And David and Rebecca, welcome and thank you for being here.
All right, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, House and Medical Affairs Committee. Thank you for providing the time for us to speak today. Madam Davis, Madam Chair, my name is David Bell, and this is my wife, Rebecca. We live in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a retired Chief Petty Officer from the United States Navy, trained in submarine warfare. I was nuclear trained as well. From 2018 to 2022, I served as Vice Chair on the Charleston County Constituent School Board District 10. I have an MBA in leadership from Charleston Southern University. I am a building automation and cybersecurity engineer. My wife is a software integrator. She chaperones our daughter's high school band and volunteers at their sporting events. And we have two daughters. They're 15 and 14, and one of them is transgender. We are here in opposition of H 4624 and any other legislation that impedes on our parental rights for gender-affirming care. Our daughter showed signs of gender nonconformity as early as 3. We would have tantrums. We would have yelling at us. I wish if she would say, "I'd rather die than be a boy." She would tell us that she wanted her penis cut off. She elevated to violence against her sister. She told her mom that she wished she would die. We had to hold her back in 2nd grade because she had such horrible grades and time adjusting at school. So we finally, after around 5 years old, she started seeing a mental health professional. After we held her back in school, we started letting her live in the gender role of a female because we're like, something's got to give. We got to move forward with this, and we slowly started seeing signs of improvement with her anxiety and depression, and so eventually she started living full time as a girl, and we still saw a lot of anxiety and depression, but it was better. She was in MUSC twice before she started puberty blockers for suicidal ideations due to bullying from kids at school. Once we started blockers, we went through the whole standard of care. She spent 7 years with mental health professionals. She had a gender therapist, a regular behavioral therapist, a psychiatrist, and a pediatric endocrinologist, and our pediatrician. So with that, it took us 7 visits with the endocrinologist and 3.5 years before we ever did any blockers. And so once we started blockers, her behavior improved, her
David, thank you for your testimony, and David, I appreciate that. And Rebecca, your opportunity to speak is now. So Rebecca, would you want to take advantage of that opportunity?
Yes. I think what I would like to end with is just a couple days ago, we were explaining to my daughter that we were coming here about this bill. And she asked us point blank why you all don't believe her, or why people don't believe her. She knows who she is. And it's really heartbreaking when I can't give her an answer. So I ask you as parents even, think of your child as they're sitting there asking for help and you can't give it to them. So I'm really hoping that you will really think hard about this, on the lives that this really does impact. Because as parents, we don't choose this journey for her. Oh my goodness, this is a painful journey. And so it's the last thing we want. So please, I'm begging you, do not pass this bill. Thank you.
If there are questions from the committee, are you two willing to accept any questions?
Absolutely.
Committee members, are there any questions? J.A., Representative Moore.
Thank y'all so much for coming up here, especially in this weather, to share your story. Petty Officer, thank you for your service.
Yes, sir. Chief, sir.
Chief, thank you. Appreciate your service. I represent Goose Creek, so that part of
Yes, sir.
where the weapon station is. So I definitely appreciate your service. I know this is a probably very tough subject for you all, especially to talk so publicly about. So I appreciate your testimony. Can you talk to me, in the environment, especially in the military, where it's a very, I'm just going to talk frankly, if that's okay. It's a very kind of macho kind of environment. Can you talk to me about, as you and your family have been going through this transition with your daughter, how were you always in favor of this kind of this treatment, before this happened to you personally? Can you kind of talk about from a personal perspective?
I would say that it took us roughly, probably, we started seeing the signs at like 3 to 5 years old and earlier, but I didn't grasp it until she was probably 7. And then it took me a while because of that background to really say, okay, I believe this, because I still have the misconceptions that most people do about trans people. And yeah, it took me a long time to get over that macho-ness and say, all right, this is the right path. I mean, it took a lot of her convincing me it was the right path, and us talking and reading and researching and finding out that it actually is only 1% of people detransition, not 60 or 70% that was spoken earlier. And we'd rather our daughter be alive now and not when she's 70 or 80 if she breaks an arm or a hip, whatever.
Yeah, and talk to me, because one of the things that when I'm reading this bill that's challenging for me, because I'm a big advocate.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to mental health. There's parts of this bill where I'm just wrestling with it, because I understand the sponsors of this bills want to protect children selectively on some other issues, maybe not so much, but specifically around this mental health piece. Can you talk specifically about, without sharing private stuff,
Yes, sir.
but just this concept of not allowing the mental health piece,
Right.
Especially in your particular story?
Yes, sir. With the mental health piece, we had the gender therapist, we had a regular therapist, then we had the psychiatrist. We tried all kinds of different antidepressants and ADHD meds and things like that. They guided us to, they even didn't initially say, oh, she's transgender or gender nonconforming. A lot of it was oppositional defiance. We sent her to a couple, 3 specialists, and they all turned around and said, oh, oppositional defiance and things like that. But once, I think it was, like we said, about 7 or 8, at some point, we had been researching. We both said, this has got to be it. And then we talked to our mental health professional about it, and that's when we started moving forward with things. It wasn't given to us. It wasn't provided to us. They never recommended it. And they didn't even know the right therapist to give us to even talk to. Initially, we had to find the gender therapist. We had to find the therapist that would accept us and not want to give a Christian worldview or try to change her to being what they thought she should be. So it was very hard. Even in Charleston, it's very hard to find therapists that are available for children like mine. And so if you make it illegal, you're really getting rid of mental health therapists for gender non-conforming children all the way around. Because, like I said, there's a handful, if that. She did do antidepressants, and we actually, about a year and a half ago, we were able to take her off after we got going on HRT. And she is ADHD, but we got to the point now where she doesn't have to take her ADHD meds if she's not in school. Like she used to when she was on it. We had to have them every day, or it was horrible. It's the best way I can tell you. Tantrums, screaming, violence. So the mental health part, if nothing else, mental health needs to stay, and we need to grandfather children that are already on this treatment.
Any further questions, Representative? Any questions? Representative Petalino.
Hey, how are y'all? Just quick question. At what age did she start the hormone therapy?
She started puberty blockers at 12 years old after 7 years of mental health counseling and 3 years of seeing a pediatric endocrinologist and 3.5 years of x-rays and blood work to make sure she started puberty over a 3.5-year period, 7 visits over a 3.5-year period.
And how long has she been on the hormone therapy?
She started HRT a year after, and right now she's just over 15, so she's been on HRT for about 2 years, and blockers and HRT for 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you both again for your testimony here today.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
We have Debbie Billings. I apologize, we didn't put you on deck, and Dr. Martha Edwards, you're going to be on deck. So Debbie Billings, thank you so much, and again, I apologize, I forgot to put you on deck.
That's okay. I would like a point of clarification. My understanding, as in every hearing, is that we have 3 minutes, but we're getting cut off at 2.
Yep, it's at the pleasure of the chairman, and based on the number of people is the sole reason we went to 2 versus 3. And you
Okay.
have 2 minutes, and they haven't started yet.
Okay, so my name is Deborah Billings, and I'm a public health professional, constituent, and proud parent of a queer teen. And I'm here to ask you to stop H 4624 in its tracks today, in this meeting. It's a bill that insults the basic morality of every South Carolinian and diverts attention from health and medical issues that do need to be addressed in this state. So I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to send my points to all of you because I do want to whittle it down to 2 points. One, I am a parent, along with my husband, of a queer teen. We have been through this process. What I wish is that the co-sponsors of these kinds of bills, and there are several coming up, would talk to parents, would talk to us, and understand exactly what the process is. It is a multi-year process. It is one that we have to search for, as these other parents just testified, the very few mental health providers that are available that have a specialty in this area, the very few endocrinologists who are practicing in this state, and to take that away from us as parents by people who do not understand the process. And in fact, given the language of the bill, I highly doubt that you even took the time to ask any parents what the process entails and what the impact on our children will be if you pass this kind of bill. What I do want to say is, let's pivot. This is the Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee. What you could be working on in this very first day are real health issues that face South Carolinians every single day. Did you know that we have an F rating from the March of Dimes because of our preterm birth rate? Did you know that pregnancy-related mortality increased by 9% and that Black women in our state experience 67% higher pregnancy-related mortality, women dying, than white women? There are lots of policy issues that you as legislators can and should be working on that relate to people's health. Please do your job.
Thank you. Will you take any questions?
I will take questions.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Committee members, are there any questions? Right. Thank you. There's no questions at
No
this time.
questions to a parent.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for the
Wonderful.
subcommittee members. Thank you very much. Martha Edwards, you're up, and Sevi Alvarez is on deck.
Dr. Martha Edwards. I practice pediatrics, general pediatrics in Rock Hill, South Carolina for the past 25 years. And I oppose this bill. Many of the children I see in my office are struggling with anxiety and depression due to the trans children that are due to bullying in schools and due to their fear of being their authentic selves in a school or community setting, often due to things like this that are making them feel like they're at risk, there's something wrong with them. Recently, I had a 12-year-old patient who came in with mom for an annual physical. This was a biological boy who presented with decidedly feminine features. And I asked what pronouns this child preferred, and the child looked at his mother, and she said, "It's okay, be honest." And the child replied, "Well, at home, I usually choose she, her pronouns, and I have for many years. My parents allow me to be who I want to be at home. At school, though, my parents and I feel it's not safe for me to do that, so I go by he, him pronouns at school. Because we live in South Carolina," this child said. With my simple question, that's providing gender-affirming care. I didn't prescribe hormones or puberty blockers. They weren't asking for that. But it's just providing supportive care for the whole child, to affirm for this child that I'm going to be there for mental and physical health issues, no matter what happens. And if he gets so distressed that he needs puberty blockers, I will refer and we'll proceed in that direction. But at this point, that's not even on the table. Neither I nor anyone I know has ever prescribed these medications without the full support of the patient's family and by request of the parents, nor do I even know how I'd begin to do that. But unfortunately, many children are not supported by their parents, and they're the ones that show up in the ICUs and in the ERs. This bill encourages parents to practice judgment and shame rather than unconditional support and love for their children. As a pediatrician, I'll always encourage that we practice unconditional love both at home and in our community for all children.
Thank you. Dr. Will you take some questions if
Yes.
there are any? Thank you very much for your testimony. Members, are there any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Sevi Alvarez and J. Mark Bayer, you're on deck.
Good afternoon. My name is Sevi Alvarez, and I'm here from the city of Spartanburg. I'm here to speak in opposition to H4624. This bill is a transparent assault on the medical freedoms of trans people, youth in particular. Being trans is not a choice. It is a medically documented condition, and the vast majority of medical professionals agree. Trans people are born that way, and the only choice they make about it is to whom they reveal it, if they ever do. In many cases, being trans requires medical intervention, and when treatment is not provided, the life of the trans person is in danger. I spent most of last year battling intestinal cancer. When my doctors found out what was going on with my body, they recommended treatment for me. It included drugs with side effects that were irreversible. I had to undergo 2 major surgeries that forever altered my physiology. The doctors recommended these life-changing procedures because they were the best chance I had to successfully treat my condition, and I'm happy to say that it worked. My cancer was successfully treated, and I am expected to live a long and healthy life. What would have happened if the state of South Carolina had outlawed those radiation treatments and chemotherapy drugs? What if they weren't allowed to perform the surgeries that saved my life? Where would I be? Probably dead within a year. Lucky for me, no one in this legislature had the idea to outlaw cancer treatments for the sake of fear-mongering and earning cheap political points. Let me be clear, I am not saying that being trans is equivalent to having cancer. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being trans, but the fact remains that in both cases, the proper treatment irrevocably changes the body. When that happened to me, the government didn't object, nor should they, and they wouldn't object if a child had to have cancer treatments either. Trans people already have a hard enough time living in a society that still has trouble accepting them as human beings, as children of God created in His image. They should not be forced to fight battles against a hostile government on top of that. The medical freedom of a marginalized group is on the line with this bill, and make no mistake, even if you are not a trans person, if you allow this bill to pass, then you are giving the government a license to strip away the rights of anyone in our state from making their own medical decisions. It could happen to you next. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, I'm going to ask you, so we can move along. If you have any questions, please make sure you just speak up and make sure that we're notified, so I'm not taking that extra 30 seconds after each speaker. J. Mark Bayer.
Yes.
And we have Jace Woodrum on deck. Thank you, Mr. Bayer.
Thank you. I'm a native South Carolinian, born and raised in Horry and Georgetown counties. I spent over 20 years of my professional life serving my community as a registered nurse. I also stand before you today as a leader of P-Flight Polly's Island and the families I represent from Horry and Georgetown counties. As a medical professional in our state, I took an oath to do no harm, and this proposed piece of legislation will do harm to real South Carolina families. It is absolutely shameful. Medical care for gender dysphoria is evidence-based and medically necessary care. This is life-saving care. Medical and mental health professionals agree this care is safe, effective, and necessary. Care is individualized to meet the needs of each patient, managed through a medical team that works closely with the family. Healthcare works best when you get the care you need when you need it. There's also certain underlying fundamental principles that guide those of us in the medical field, one of those being least invasive first. Gender-affirming care is a thorough, methodical medical process that supports both physical and mental health, following this very principle of least invasive first. The data shows us that transgender youth who are affirmed in their gender by at least one adult reduces their risk of suicide by more than 40%. 40%. Shame on you for attacking mental health with this legislation. I know and respect our transgender families, and I applaud their courageousness. but all South Carolina families, parents and families have the fundamental right to make their own medical care decisions for their children. These rights should be free from politicians dictating provisions and limitations based on their own misunderstandings, perceptions, and morality. That is not the foundation of our country or state. Those of you that have drafted this legislation, do you know any trans men or women? Have you spoken with the parents of a trans youth? I have. Their stories are not mine to share, but I can tell you this, my trans brothers and sisters are simply fighting for the right to exist. Where have I heard this before?
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Are there any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Jace Woodrum and Amberlyn Boyder is on deck.
Hey y'all, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you here today. I live just down the road, a very wet road right now in Columbia, but I grew up in upstate South Carolina. Growing up, I was a straight A student. In fact, I graduated college from USC without ever having made a B. But that's not because I was so devoted to my studies. It was because I was trying to be perfect. Perfect for my parents, for my church, for my teachers, because I believed there was something wrong with me. I haven't always had words for it, but I am transgender. As my 8-year-old son puts it, I was born with a girl body, but a boy heart, a boy mind, a boy soul. There was a time in my life where I didn't understand that about myself, and there was no one I could turn to help me sort it out. I felt so alone, lost, misunderstood, that I attempted suicide. Not because there's something wrong with me, but because I lived in a world that rejected me. I left South Carolina in 2010 because I couldn't imagine a future here. I went to Colorado, and a lot of us talk about the brain drain we have in this state. I was a part of that. I took my scholarship, my education paid for by Palmetto Fellows, and I left and I went to Colorado where I started therapy. No transgender person gets care without therapy first. And with the help of my therapist, I was able to access the care I needed to transition to be the man I am today. I've never looked back. I have peace. I have joy. I have confidence in who I am. And in 2022, after 12 years away, I moved back home to South Carolina. And I came back because I love this state and I want to be a part of making it a better place for transgender people like me. So I came home to serve as the executive director of the ACLU of South Carolina. And I urge you not to pass this bill.
Jace, thank you for your testimony. Thank you very much. Amberlyn and Dylan Gunnels is on deck. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for hearing me today. My name is Amberlyn Boyder, and I'm a wife and mother living in Spartanburg. To be clear about my background, I was born and raised in the upstate. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I was always at church because I loved hearing my dad preach. I got saved at age 7 and rededicated my life at 14. I worked with youth groups for years. I played in the band at 2 Southern Baptist megachurches and performed for the South Carolina Baptist Association's annual meeting. I went to a Baptist seminary. I met my spouse on Christian Mingle, and we adopted our daughter through a Christian agency. I'm also an ordained minister, and I still study the Bible and its origins. But instead of religion, this is about children. While our beliefs inform our decisions, we also rely on our God-given senses to make wise decisions as individuals and parents. Just as we trust that God has given a mechanic the wisdom to repair our cars, or a pastor the wisdom to repair our spirits, we trust that God has given doctors and psychologists the wisdom to repair our bodies and minds. God gave us brains to recognize just how important this care is to this people group. And I believe most doctors can point to a procedure with a 1% regret rate, are going to be very comfortable performing that procedure. While I don't know what it's like to be a trans youth who received that medically necessary care, I do know what it was like to not receive it. Because my parents refused that care, puberty caused permanent, irreversible damage to my body, and it caused me to experience a much harder life than I would have otherwise. And by the way, parents still have the right to deny that treatment to their children. When I hear my daughter laugh, I know I'd move mountains to keep her happy. including giving her medical care if she needs it. I hope you will all as well by rejecting this bill, and may God compel you to ask thoughtful questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Dylan Gunnels and Avery Evans is on deck.
Good afternoon. My name is Dylan Gunnels. I serve as president of South Carolina Pride Movement, as well as an LGBTQ organization I founded called the Agape Table. This is not my story to share, so I'm here to share a story of a South Carolina family that asked to be anonymous because of their safety. I'm the mother of a transgender son who is currently enrolled in college to become a paramedic. He has good friends, an amazing caretaker of lots of pets, gives the most thoughtful presents, and has a fantastic sense of humor. Like any 18-year-old, he drives around to see his friends, eats too much fast food, goes to the gym, and stresses out about final exams. He is able to be his true self after a legal name change, testosterone injections, and top surgery. He proudly faces the world each day with a masculine name, a flat chest, and a deep voice. The legal and physical changes he has undergone have been essential to get him to where he is today. He can proudly live each day with his true voice, a name he identifies with, and a body he feels comfortable in. At age 14, the day before he was going to start as a freshman in high school, my son came to me and told me that he was transgender. He had told me many of his friends and also his therapist, but he had kept it from me to wait until he was comfortable revealing his true identity. He knew I would be supportive, but had to gain the confidence to reveal it nonetheless. My son had been dealing with mental health issues, hospitalized for suicidal thoughts, and was under the care of a therapist. This was no spur-of-the-moment decision, and I have supported him 100% since he revealed it to me. Having access to a therapist, adolescent specialist, and plastic surgeon has made him the stable, successful student he is today. Life is still hard. He had a fight with his best friend, he struggled in freshman biology class, and he gets annoyed when I ask him to make his dentist appointment. But he doesn't wake up each day and hate his body, his name, and his voice. He is a man, and he is my son. He is one of the lucky ones. Over the last 5 years, we have had dozens of his friends over that cannot be their true selves at home, and they are not safe. This does nothing but harm our children, and we beg you to please not pass this legislation.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Avery Evans is up next, and then we'll hear Zoe Glass. Avery, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Turn your mic on. Green light comes on.
Yeah.
Hold it. Hold it down.
We got
You don't have to continue to hold it.
No.
Okay.
I'm obviously not a doctor.
But we got the thumbs up from audio to your left.
Perfect.
Avery, your time has not started yet either. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you. My name is Avery Evans. I'm a resident of South Carolina, and I am testifying against the bill H4624. Simply put, this bill is invasive, uninformed, and targeting an already marginalized group without a real understanding of the issues that surround it. Starting with Section 42340, which is attempting to ban public funds for gender transition procedures, and Section 4242350, which hopes to punish medical practices who provide trans health care to patients on Medicaid. Not only are both of these unnecessarily cruel and obviously biased against the trans constituents of the state, but they also exhibit a blatant disregard for the financial disadvantage said constituents already face. In 2023, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that LGBTQ+ workers in this country earn 90 cents for every dollar that the typical worker earns. LGBTQ+ people of color and trans individuals earn even less when compared to the typical worker. How are trans individuals supposed to financially support themselves when already met with these societal challenges before a bill like this that would only make it harder is even instated? Moreover, what is the purpose of Medicaid if not to ensure the health and well-being of taxpayers, no matter their gender identity? And why ban public fundraising for a specific type of procedure while allowing it for virtually every other type of procedure and even non-medical causes that are much less necessary? Hormone replacement therapy and gender-affirming procedures can be crucial to the well-being and health of trans individuals, and for many, means life or death. As with practically every other medical procedure, these wouldn't be performed by a doctor if that doctor didn't deem it safe and to the benefit of the patient. If our representatives want to help the trans people of this state, might I suggest starting with the disproportionate levels of abuse, homelessness, and unemployment that they face here and across the nation. The National Center for Transgender Equality has found that 10% of trans South Carolina residents are unemployed, 28% live in poverty, and 20% have experienced homelessness, even as minors. These threaten our lives daily, and I implore you because of that to please vote against this bill. Thank you.
Avery, thank you for your testimony today. Thank you very much. We have Zoe Glass, and for those who are in the waiting room virtually, you are not forgotten, and we are about to switch over to a virtual session of this meeting in a few moments. So those virtually, please come back to your computers and know that we'll be getting to you shortly. Zoe, thank you for being here, and Nathaniel Hawkins is on deck. Zoe Glass, thank you. Zoe.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Press the button and hold it, and it's not turned off, so just leave it on.
Hi, my name is Zoe Glass, and I just want to thank the chairman and the subcommittee for allowing us to speak today in opposition of H4624. I would like to first share with you an anonymous letter we received from a South Carolina teenager. Hi, I am a 17-year-old trans kid in South Carolina. I cannot give you my name because I am one of the trans youth who are at a risk of physical harm if my family were to find out I were trans. But I still want to make myself heard. As a trans kid in this state, we are exhausted from having to prove our humanity to people who clearly want us to disappear. That is what this is about. Voting in favor of this bill is going to put trans kids' lives in jeopardy. Please do the right thing, or you'll be personally responsible for the endangerment of countless kids. We might not be able to speak in person without risking our lives, but know that South Carolina's trans kids are all watching you today. We are afraid. I ask that you please protect us, not from the imagined boogeyman, but from this harmful legislation. We deserve a life without abuse and harm, and you can do something about that. Thank you. So, it is crucial to emphasize that transgender youth deserve the same chance to thrive as their peers, and this bill poses a serious threat to their mental health of transgender youth in our state, to their safety, dignity, and equal treatment that every individual deserves. It perpetuates discrimination and intolerance and fosters an environment of fear and shame. Likewise, this bill fails to recognize that not every home is a safe space, and disclosing personal information could lead to rejection, abuse, or harmful conversion therapy practices. Let us not forget the overwhelming public support for LGBTQ+ rights in South Carolina. Statistics show that 67% of the state's population supports comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ+ people. South Carolinians recognize the humanity of LGBTQ+ individuals. We understand that there are friends, family members, and neighbors who contribute to our communities and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. This bill, thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Nathaniel Hawkins and Phil Ford is on deck. Nathaniel, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's already on.
Okay,
yes,
good. Awesome. Hi, my name is Nathaniel Hawkins. At the end of 2021, in December, I graduated from the University of South Carolina, and by the middle of 2022, I began to work for the state of South Carolina. I currently work in one of the state agencies, and I am here to speak against 4624, I believe is the bill. Specifically, since there are so many people who are going to talk about the risk to children, I've come just to underscore the public availability part, or the part about using public funds. As the fiscal impact notes, PIBA not only is not sure whether or not this would affect them, but also they are not sure whether or not this would engender some kind of lawsuit, which could be costly. In the fiscal impact statement, it also notes that there are currently 0 people in the state of South Carolina who are using the public health benefits that PIBA provides in order to get gender-affirming care. It is possible that in the next year, I will be the only one, and I would cost us, if I continue with the average, about $12,000 a year. I don't think this is a worthwhile risk for us to take as a state. We don't want the costly litigation, especially if a Democratic president wins 4 more years. Their Justice Department will probably be very happy to come by and see if they can't change the way that we do things down here. Please vote against this bill, not only for me, but for the rest of South Carolina, for all of the kids who need it. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Nathaniel, thank you for your testimony.
Have a great day, everybody.
Phil Ford and Chase Glenn is on deck.
I'm ready with a notebook if y'all have any questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair Lady. My name is Phil Ford, and I use he and him pronouns. I am representing multiple groups here today, but I stand before you to express my opposition to 4624 that seeks to ban medically necessary care for trans youth. With just the mere hearing that we're in today, according to the Trevor Project, 94% of LGBTQ plus youth will report having negative mental health impacts. They're watching and they're listening. They're seeing their rights on trial. 42% of LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide. I was one of those youths several years ago when they were debating marriage equality and they passed the amendment to not allow LGBTQ plus folks to get married in the 90s. I want to share 6 quick points with you. Medical care for trans youth is evidence-based and medically necessary. I've got it right here if you want to read it. Lawmakers should not unnecessarily interfere with medical decisions. Doctors are trained to do that. They're licensed by you all, the state. Trans youth deserve the same chance to thrive as their peers. We should not be taking away freedoms. We're South Carolina, y'all. We're supposed to be fighting for freedom. And we're stripping that away from the Bells, from the Billings, from the Fosters. The last thing I want to mention is the outing provision. If that were to remain in this legislation, children would be abused, children would be made homeless. Maybe not your children, but there will be children in some of the remote parts of South Carolina that won't have a support system, and we need to do something about it. Can I just add one more thing? Really quick, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. As a state, we should strive to create an environment where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, can live authentically and without fear. We can promote compassion, understanding, and acceptance by voting no on this bill.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Will you take some questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Recognize Representative Sessions.
Good afternoon. How we doing?
Hey, doing well. How about you?
This is just to the chair. Can we ask for or against when we have speakers citing studies? Can we get that turned into the committee? That way we have it not only for the record, but we also have it to where members can go back and look at that study. Because I know we're limited to 2 minutes.
Mr. Ford, I believe you would be willing to share reports and.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got them all right here.
Are there any other questions? Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Chase, we have Chase, and then we have Michael O'Brien on deck.
Good afternoon, committee members, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this time, this opportunity to speak against House Bill 4624. My name is Chase Glenn. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Full Acceptance and AFA Action, an LGBTQ organization, advocacy organization based in Charleston. I'm a Hanahan resident. Representative Smith knows he's my representative, one of his constituents. I've made South Carolina my home for 18 years. I'm 45 years old. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 young children. I'm also a transgender man. Thinking back to my childhood, I can look back and pinpoint core memories where at a very early age, began to feel what I would now describe as this incongruence inside of me. The sense that something inside of me just didn't line up with the expectations that were put on me to be a little girl. I grew up in the 80s in a small town in southern Illinois at a time when I had very little exposure to the LGBTQ plus community. I didn't think I knew any single gay or transgender person. I didn't have the language that we have now to describe what I was feeling, but it manifested earliest as anxiety and accessing gendered spaces like public restrooms, to the point that from elementary school through high school, I never used a public restroom in my school. This meant limiting intake of fluids, watching what I would eat, all in a desire to not have to use a public restroom. As I began to go through puberty, I struggled with ongoing depression that dipped into really dark places. Again, didn't have the language to understand or express what I now know to be gender dysphoria, the root cause of my depression. And I secretly wondered if I could ever be truly happy, if I would be able to survive in this world, if the pain and turmoil that never seemed to go away might one day be so unbearable that I just couldn't take it anymore. Fast forward to around 18 years ago, when I was scrolling through YouTube, one day I saw a young man talking about his experience and describing some of the very feelings I'd had since an early age. For the first time, I knew I wasn't alone, and that I had hope and a way out. And it took me a number of years to fully process what this could mean for me, beginning and gathering as much information as possible. A social transition, if I just might have just one more moment, please. I began hormone therapy 9 years ago, and it changed my life. And it hurts my heart to think that there are kids today who could have access to that care that I didn't have access to as a kid, and that would now have that taken away from them. Please reject this bill.
Thank you for closing those up. We appreciate your testimony. Any questions, Peter? Okay, very good. We have Michael O'Brien, and looks like Seth Rose is on deck, and then we're going virtual after Mr. Rose.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Michael O'Brien. I'm a pediatrics resident physician and a proud South Carolinian. As a pediatrics resident, I work in all kinds of settings, ranging from primary care, where kids get checkups, all the way to the intensive care unit with people like Dr. Mack, where I have the honor and the burden to care for kids in some of their darkest hours. I send so many bags of non-perishable food home with my patients because their families don't know where they're getting their next meal. I have cared for so many kids, and I have been here for a year and a half. So many kids with gunshot wounds, so many bullet holes in people's babies, as young as 2 years old, sorry, all the way up through kids who are a little bit older and into their teen years. Most frequently, I see so many kids in mental health crisis, and so many of them are LGBTQ. They are not LGBTQ because they have a mental health issue. They have a mental health issue because they're being rejected. Here's my point. Sorry, I'll bring it to my point. We have glaring problems in South Carolina for kids. Childhood hunger, gun violence, poor mental health. Why are we spending the first day of the legislative session going after a couple thousand kids, tops, and their medically necessary care? We're consistently in the top 10 states for childhood gun deaths and injuries. We are consistently highest in poverty. We have one of the highest infant mortality rates in the entire nation. I've had patients who have nearly died trying to stretch out their medications that they couldn't afford. I've cared for a child who died very slowly, and I had to watch his brain herniate out of a hole in his head because he'd been shot accidentally by his little sister. And honestly, I've lost count of the number of times that I've treated victims of abuse who have horrible, horrible mental health issues. Abuse is another thing that South Carolina is leading the nation on. So as a pediatrician who cares for all of these patients, I'm looking for someone to I'll wrap it up, but I'm looking for someone to look me in the eye and tell me why this bill is the most important thing that this subcommittee could be doing right now that's going to harm a small group of kids when we have got huge numbers of kids who need our help. Please do not give this bill a favorable report. Choose love and understanding over fear and lies. Set aside the drama and let's get to work and help some kids.
Thank you for your testimony and your service.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
And if anyone has any questions, sorry.
Yep, Jay. Representative Moore.
I'm still JA too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I put this on the record, especially when I'm talking to doctors. Again, the challenging piece to me for this legislation is the mental health treatment. You kind of talked in your testimony about it, and can you give us any other so if this bill becomes the law and the governor signs it, can you can you imagine how much more difficult it will be for you as a pediatrician to deal with children? Because just because, let me say this, just because we ban it or make it criminalized doesn't take away the pain and the trauma that these young people are going to go through. You know, what about, and we talk about minors, that's the counter argument to this. What about the young people that really need that, especially that mental health piece? I don't know if we're prepared for that part of it. And you kind of talk about, you know, what the expectations would be if this bill if it was a law now.
Yeah, absolutely. To address the first part of your question as to can I imagine what it would be like, I absolutely cannot imagine. At least 50% of my visits and follow-up visits that I see in clinic have at least one mental health concern, if not the primary reason for their visit. The reason for that is we have a massive shortage of mental health professionals in South Carolina as it is. So pediatricians, myself, a lot of people behind me are the ones who pick up the slack, and slowly mental health is becoming more part of the wheelhouse of pediatric medicine. We're kind of jumping in and learning a lot. You're absolutely right. These kids, whether or not you allow them to have gender-affirming care, they continue to be transgender. You cannot stop them from being transgender. The other thing that I think is really important to point out is a lot of our conservative lawmakers have brought up the point that they don't want kids getting this care who aren't truly transgender, right? Nobody wants that. We don't want that. Part of getting kids into mental health, into counseling for years and years and years is making sure that we're not doing things that are irreversible to someone who doesn't need it. This bill is going to hurt those kids, and then who knows? They leave South Carolina and go get the care elsewhere. We could lead the Southeast, and we could do this responsibly if we allow our pediatricians, our mental health professionals to do their job and keep the state government out of it. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you.
A lot of you have testified on very personal matters, things that are deeply important to you and your family and your loved ones, and the strength and courage that it took to come to this podium and face this committee on legislation like this is commendable. The question keeps getting asked, and I heard from the parents who said their child says, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And I fear that the answer is not for the good of South Carolina, because this is a non-issue in our state. I fear the answer is politics, not the safety of the citizens of this state. There are countless things this committee could be taking up to save lives, to save children's lives. Yet here we are to divide, fearmonger, and take up legislation on an issue that, again, is irrelevant in this state. And it's disheartening, because I have a great respect for every member of this House, and there is so much good that we could do and accomplish if we would actually address the issues that matter. It is unfortunate that here we are again, that politicians are interjecting themselves into the personal freedoms of families and citizens in this state. So thank you for the courage you've shown to come here and face this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gone through one of 2.5 sheets, and now we're going to go virtual for a few moments. And Cora Webb, we'll go ahead and call you if you want to go ahead and get ready and unmute yourself. Sarah Illing, you're on deck, and we will now hear from Cora Webb. And again, a gentle reminder for all of you online, you will be heard here in the committee room, and also you have 2 minutes. Cora, welcome, and thank you for your willingness to testify and be a part.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, Cora, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, I'm a constituent living in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm the program director of We Are Family, an organization that supports queer and trans youth. And I'm testifying against the proposed H4624 bill, which disgustingly aims to harm South Carolinians and young adults. There are endless studies by the Trevor Project, Human Rights Campaign, Campaign for Southern Equality, that have all been published on the detriment of anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ+ policies to our communities and our children. The Trevor Project's 2021 National Survey on Queer Youth Mental Health sheds light on many of these challenges by capturing the experiences of nearly 35,000 LGBTQ+ youth ages 13 to 24 across the United States. 42% of these youth seriously consider attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of trans and non-binary youth. 94% of queer and trans youth reported that recent politics, including the ones we're discussing in this meeting today, focus on taking away their rights and access negatively impact their mental health. I work with queer and trans youth who are targeted and excluded every day. Seeking care as a trans and queer person is already stressful, and the burden of having to deal with this bill puts many of my youth and community members at higher risk of self-harm and suicide. In effect, this bill will contribute to the further endangerment of our youth, which is a deplorable action. And the representatives sponsoring this bill, Hyatt, GM Smith, McCravey, Davis, Vahan, Trantham, Pope, Chapman, Taylor, Oremus, Harnett, and Lieber, you should be ashamed of the ways in which you're contributing to the endangerment of South Carolina's young people. At the beginning of this meeting, Mr. McCravey talked about questionable, unsourced stats on medical concerns that lack context. If you and the other reps are so concerned about preventing and addressing young adults' medical conditions, you should be a champion of larger policy fixes that would elevate the health of young people, eradicating poverty, raising wages, challenging the housing crisis, forced homelessness, and surging food prices, expanding access to Medicaid and free health care, medication for children and adults, elevated pregnancy and prenatal care, and believe in the needs of our youth. Against all the misinformation being shared about access to young adults' to gender-affirming and medically necessary care, here are some important aspects to consider why we oppose this bill.
Thank you, Cora, for your testimony. I don't know if you heard that alarm, but I did give you a couple extra moments there. Cora, thank you very much for your testimony. And Sarah Illing is up now, and Matt Sharp, you are on deck. Sarah, thank you for your testimony, and we'll hear from you. And
thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yep, Sarah, we can hear you. Yep, just to confirm. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Sarah Illing. It's a pleasure to be here today. I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina. I graduated from Greenville High and the Fine Arts Center. I grew up singing in the praise band at Buncombe Street United Methodist Church. I'm here today because I strongly support trans youth and I oppose this bill. Here are some deep-rooted South Carolina values behind my position. The first one is y'all means all, that we should be working together. At its best, this state taught me the values of welcome, hospitality, acceptance, and love. I grew up singing lyrics like, for as long as I live, I'll testify to love, like the parents that are here today, and you're covered in the fingerprints of God. But we have a really long way to go to live up to those values. And for me, as someone who's lost a really close trans loved one to suicide, I can tell you it takes us in the wrong direction. Trans folks are part of every community in the state, across political parties, generations, and cultures, and they always will be, and this law won't change that. This law will only prevent people from getting the care they need to survive, and then further, it'll hurt the state's international reputation and ability to compete economically. It'll prevent businesses from wanting to work in our state. There's no reason to add that barrier to South Carolina. Further, as many people have said, South Carolina is about small government and freedom. This law would block parents' rights to decide what's best for their kids with their doctors. The government shouldn't tell parents how to raise their kids. And finally, I just want to close with the values that I have of hope and faith and love. I really have faith that some of y'all will be willing to open your hearts and minds today and listen to a trans person who maybe you haven't heard before, and to hear the love and the pain and the truth in our voices. Remember that there's nothing wrong with being transgender. The only thing that's wrong is the way that trans people are often treated. But today is a chance to vote against that division and to vote against government overreach, and instead to vote for a positive and prosperous future. And to all the trans and non-binary people here today, I just want to say you're deeply loved, you're deeply worthy, and you belong in South Carolina. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you for your testimony and keeping that right on time.
My name is Matt Sharp. I'm Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. ADF serves as co-counsel with the state of Alabama defending its law that protects children from dangerous puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sterilizing surgeries. I want to briefly emphasize 2 points about the focus of this bill. First, this bill protects children who deserve to experience a natural childhood, who are highly susceptible to peer pressure, social media, and other negative influences, and who this legislature has long protected from things that we know are harmful and dangerous, like smoking, alcohol, and even tanning beds. Instead, this bill ensures that counseling and psychotherapy, both of which are fully permitted and which don't carry the same dangers as drugs and surgeries, are prioritized for South Carolina's kids. Second, no high-quality studies have shown that these drugs and procedures are safe or effective for children. Rather, a growing body of evidence in a growing number of countries are concluding that these items pose dire health risk to kids, including irreversible sterilization and impaired brain development. Many organizations, including the United Kingdom National Institute for Health, have systematically reviewed available evidence on the use of hormonal intervention to treat gender dysphoric children, and they've concluded that it's low-quality evidence. On this basis, England, along with Sweden and Finland, have stopped using puberty blockers and hormones to treat gender dysphoric youth in clinical settings. These are the same countries that pioneered these experimental procedures. And yet they're finding that these drugs and surgeries are not helping kids. They hurt them. And that's why we must learn from their mistakes, not repeat them. Based on this evidence, 22 states have now enacted laws like HB 4624. And federal appellate courts are upholding these laws against legal challenges. For example, just last fall, the Sixth Circuit upheld Tennessee and Kentucky's law, concluding that there is a long tradition of permitting state governments to regulate medical treatments for adults and children. Thank you, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have a question. Representative Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Matt. Thank you for your time. Are you familiar with the Trevor Project?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm trying to understand, you cited a Swedish study, was it? I'm trying to wrap I'm trying to understand how are these two studies, or the Trevor Project might have multiple studies, in the study that you're talking about, offering up contradicting results. Can you talk or speak to those?
Yes, thank you, Representative. What Sweden and England and these other institutes, and some of this stuff included in written testimony, groups like the McMaster's University, which pioneered the systematic reviews, they're not cherry-picking studies. What they're looking at is all of the studies out there, everything that's been produced, and saying what are the highest quality ones, the ones that are based on the best evidence, the best reporting, and looking at those. And it's based on those highest quality reports, those highest quality surveys, that they're looking and saying this is not producing good mental and physical health outcomes for children. And it's based, again, on those high quality studies, looking at everything, not cherry picking, that these countries have now decided we're going to prioritize counseling and mental health therapy rather than the drugs and surgeries.
And what are some qualities of a high quality study? You know what I mean? What are some attributes? I mean, I'm trying to make sense of this data because I got a room full of people citing studies that contradict what you're saying.
Yep, thank you, Representative. So when we talk about high-quality studies, and again, I would point to McMaster University, which they really set the standard for what are high-quality versus low-quality. What they say is what you want is things like the double-blind surveys. You want things where you're staying with the program participants, not just for a few months, but following them long-term to see what are the outcomes of the puberty blockers and hormones. And so, for example, the Swedish study, one of those, followed individuals for numerous years on into adulthood. And that's where they started seeing these high rates of suicide, 19 times higher rates of suicide than they were seeing with comparable individuals who weren't on the drugs and surgeries. And so again, that's where we want to look to what are the highest quality studies, and that's what these other countries are looking at, not cherry picking, but the best quality ones. And again, I cite to those in my written testimony, and hope you have the opportunity to look at those in more depth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Petalina has a question for you, Matt.
Just to follow up on what Heath said, you keep mentioning cherry picking. So you're saying with the Swedish study that they actually followed individuals who were going through the puberty blockers or dealing and on the puberty blockers, whereas with the Trevor Project, just based off some documentation I have, they were more like anonymous surveys that people can just go online and fill out, correct? Is that what you mean when you say that?
Thank you, Representative. Yes, that's my understanding. Sweden was a long-term study following individuals for multiple years. The question was about low quality, and it's exactly like you pointed out, an online survey where there's no data on who is filling it out, no understanding of what is this individual on, no follow-up, no of those things that really make for a higher quality study.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? Thank you. Seeing, hearing none. Matt, thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate it. Lacey Lane is up next, and Ryan Stevens, you're on deck. Lacey, let's get a quick mic check with you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You're perfect. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Lacey Lane from York County. I'm a school counselor of 15 years, and I'm a mother of 2 children here in public schools. I'm testifying against H 4624, as it is a cruel and unnecessary bill that is harmful to trans students in many ways. Trans students should be treated with dignity and not outed by their schools. As a school counselor, I'm aware that outing a student to their family can put them at risk for harm. Trans students are much more likely to be abused by their immediate family based on their gender identity. Familial rejection and abuse dramatically increase the risk of suicidality, substance abuse, and depression. Sadly, not every child can be their true selves at home without risking their physical and mental well-being. If this bill passes, it will jeopardize the mental health and physical safety of gender non-conforming students, and it places educators in the crosshairs. We're in the midst of a teacher recruitment and retention crisis here in South Carolina. This is really not the time to burden teachers with unethical and harmful requirements. Forced outing bills like H 4624 are not about parental rights, they're about harming trans students. If this bill was really about parental rights, why does it take away my parental rights to make medical decisions for my own children? This bill bans medically necessary health care, including puberty-blocking drugs and hormones, which are necessary to the mental health and safety of trans students. They explore these medical options with their trusted medical professionals under the guidance and support of their parents. Gender-affirming surgery is not explored until adulthood, so that's an unnecessary inclusion of the bill. Why do bill sponsors insist on banning necessary health care for trans youth? I'm truly concerned about their obsession with youth genitals. Please oppose H 4624, as it's well documented by medical professionals that gender-affirming health care is necessary and life-saving health care. A House Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee that does not contain medical or mental health professionals should allow those in the medical and mental health profession to do their jobs without interference. Please do not take away my rights as a parent to make medical decisions for my children. Please do not push forward legislation that was written with the intention to harm trans youth. Please do not legislate based on political agendas and rhetoric, but rather do what's best for the youth in our state. Thank you for the opportunity to testify virtually. That eliminated obstacles such as childcare, time off of work, travel to Columbia. I appreciate the opportunity.
Lacey, thank you very much for your testimony. I am being notified there's a member that has a question for you. Will you take a question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Beach.
Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you are a school counselor in the upstate, and my question for you is, let's say that this bill passes and it is now law. And my question is, who's the best person on staff at the school to contact the parents? Was that the teacher? Is that the counselor, vice principal? Who would you, in your opinion, would be, if you were going to follow the law, who would be the best person to do that? Thank you.
As the bill is written, a lot of parts are vague, so I would hope there would be a lot of explaining and training on the part of educators across the state on how to keep themselves safe legally, and also how to wrestle with the ethical nature. I know it's against my ethical standards as a school counselor to disclose such information that can be harmful for my students. As far as the bill is written, it looks like all public school staff. So I would assume that's teachers, that's administrators, that's school counselors. It's any staff that these children might come in contact and disclose anything about their gender identity. Or I would want to know more as a educator, does this include gender expression? Does this include, hearsay? At which point would an educator be required to disclose? And again, as a school counselor of 15 years in this great state, and my educational experience, my ethical guidelines, this is harmful. So I hope that this doesn't come to be a bill, that as it's written, it would be any one of those people that would have to do the disclosure.
Thank you.
I understood your question.
I believe you answered the question, and we have one more. Representative Patalino.
Good afternoon. So my question to you, you made the comment that you are a school counselor and that you feel like it is dangerous to inform parents when children come to you about issues with themselves. But in the same instance, you said that you felt that this bill was dangerous to tell you as a parent what you can and can't do for your child medically. Explain that to me, please.
Sure. So as a school counselor, students can come to you for a variety of reasons. My scope of practice is going to be to help students with issues that impact their educational success. That doesn't typically include support with a gender identity journey. Sometimes that might impact their school success in a variety of ways that research can show, but that's not going to be the typical mode that they're going to receive. They're typically going to be receiving that support outside of school with a therapist that specializes in that, and again with their medical professionals. As far as it might come as a disclosure to their school counselors, it can come up in a session, it can come up in a guidance lesson, it can come up in a variety of ways that we interact with students. Now, I do have consistent communication with parents for students that I support with specific issues, and I'm going to share strategies, I'm going to share skills, I'm going to share things that can be helpful with what we're working on during our short-term counseling together that they can reinforce in the home environment. So that parental communication, that's always there. When we're talking about disclosing a student's gender identity, if a student is not ready to disclose that with their parents, there's probably a reason for that, whether it's they know by their own personal lived experiences that that's not a safe situation for them to do so, or they're not at that part of their journey. That's not up for me as a school counselor or educator to make that jump for them. Now, as a parent, I have the opportunity to make medical decisions for myself, which is now limited by the state, I should say, because as a woman, those rights have been taken away from me. But I do have those abilities, and for my own children as well. And when we have an overreaching bill like this, this now eliminates that health care that could be necessary should my children, disclose to me that that is part of their identity journey.
But if we don't inform the parents that these children are having these thoughts or feel this way, how can they get them the appropriate help?
So I imagine, I'm an elementary school counselor, so my level of scope and experience with transgender students is going to be limited comparative to my secondary colleagues. It doesn't mean I haven't experienced it in my 15 years because we have amazing transgender students in our elementary schools across our great state. But my experience with that is going to be a little bit more limited. But when it comes to that disclosure, I hear what you're saying. You're saying if they need this support, parents could be the ones to help guide them. And I would agree that those parents who are supportive are probably going to be the ones that find out first because they have raised their children in a home where they know that their children can come to them and disclose and share information and feel supported and safe in doing so. So I think as a professional, I would use my best judgment with whatever student I was working with, and I would have to go with the information that they disclose as far as their comfort, as far as those risk factors would go. I'm always going to encourage students to be open and honest with their parents. I do, as a parent, respect and understand that that's what all parents want. They want that connection and communication with their students. But I also know in my 15 years of experiences as a counselor that not all of our students across the state have that type of love and support within their homes. So while I would hope that I can encourage them to disclose that information, I hope that it's not forced upon me to disclose it for them because that can do harm for the ways that I listed and for all of the studies that exist out there and for all the information shared by the medical professionals that spoke with y'all today.
Thank you.
Lacey, thank you so very much for taking those questions, and more importantly, equally important, thank you for your service to our state. Next, we have Ryan Stevens. Ryan, we'll do a quick mic check.
Good afternoon. Hello. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Ryan, thank you for your testimony. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I just want to say I reside in Rock Hill. I have 3 amazing children. Their ages are 11, 7, and 6. And I reviewed this bill, and reading it just brought up some major concerns to me, because the 4624 is going to strip my parental rights to decide what is best for me as a parent going forward. And I also was reading on House Bill 3197, which is called the Parents' Bill of Rights, which the state would protect and enshrine parental rights to have fundamental rights regarding the upbringing, education, and care of their children, to limit the ability of the government to infringe on parental rights. This bill, 4624, would be in direct violation of my said parental rights and all parental rights of any child, regardless if they have a child with gender dysmorphia. Why would the state of South Carolina want to dictate how a parent will make medical decisions for their child? And my parental rights should not be taken advantage of by the state of South Carolina. For the last year and a half, I worked for a major manufacturer here in South Carolina, and we led the internal transition to cover trans healthcare for all of our employees and for trans children in the state of South Carolina. And I was misinformed. I was very uneducated on this topic, and I believed that sex changes or gender changes were happening under the age of 18. That is not the case at all in this state, across the United States, as the Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and major insurance companies will not cover or recommend any type of changes under 18. However, they will encourage constant communication between mental health professionals, between pediatricians, with parents and families, in a supportive community to ensure all of our trans children have a good community of love and support. And
Ryan, thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to let you complete that sentence before you went on. Let's see if there's any questions for you, Ryan, from the committee. Don't see or hear any questions at this point. Ryan, thank you very much for your testimony, and I know several of you are still holding on the virtual, so you're welcome to stay with us as long as your schedule permits. Folks, we are back to the in-person portion. We have 1.5 sheets for time comparison purposes. We've gone through 1 sheet and 5 testimonies online. I'm going to make the decision to plow on through. Committee members, I know several of you have already excused yourself, so I would encourage you to continue to do so. I'm just afraid if we take a 5-minute break, it's going to go to 15 minutes because it's very difficult to get everyone back. So I say the same thing to all of you. If you need to take a break, we welcome you to step out and come back. But let's jump right back in. Tate Few, we'll invite you to come forward. Eric Childs, you're on deck, and Bill Key, you're after Eric. Tate, welcome, and let's give that mic a check real quick on that one to make sure that button's the right way.
It's on.
Good.
It's on. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Members of the subcommittee, I am testifying as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I stand before you today to adamantly oppose H4624. Let's start off with requiring school staff to report a minor. I'm guessing that all of you here do not understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone in the LGBTQ plus community. I can tell you what that feels like. Throughout your life, you come to notice that many people make your identity their business, and in some cases even get offended when you don't voluntarily disclose it with them. It is being worried about how your identity will be perceived in any given space, and the fear that you will be faced with a hateful response. And when initially coming out, it is being terrified of how those that care for you may react. And what this bill does is disregard the feelings of our children and the negative impacts that may ensue from informing every single parent about private, intimate information about oneself. What you are doing is forcing someone to come out, interfering in family relations, and increasing violence and oppression for the transgender community. Let's move on to gender-affirming care. It is apparent to me the irony of this legislature
pushing for parental consent for prescription medicine for minors, with your reasoning being that the parent is the best advocate for the child's medical affairs. And yet, with this bill, you would take away the rights of parents and the child to decide jointly what is best. I would hope that you all know that most gender-affirming care provided to minors is done solely with parental consent and lengthy consultation with a physician. What you are doing here is saying that the legislature knows better than the families and the doctors treating them. Every individual and their needs are different, and to put a blanket ban on gender-affirming care is reckless and will result in subsequent mental health problems for transgender youth, such as depression and suicide. However, you still choose not to improve mental health resources in our state. In addition, it will remove parents from the equation to where they would be unable to help their child through their transition. I'm fed up with this being treated as if transgender youth is a mental health disorder. It is who they are. It is their true self. We should be progressing in our mindset about identity as it has existed on this earth since we have. Being gay was declassified as a mental health disorder in 1973, and yet here we are still in 24 saying that a child, quote, suffers with transgenderism, as it says in the bill. I urge our state to do better. I urge you to do better, to make our children feel heard, represented, and safe, and to set an example for them so that we can move toward a more accepting future. Please oppose this bill and do not let it move to full committee.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. I don't see any questions at this point. We have Eric Childs is next, and Bill Key is on deck. Say that again?
Number 25, the 21st person.
Okay, gotcha. 25.
Good afternoon. I'll start by thanking you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Eric Childs. I'm a resident of South Carolina, an Operation Iraqi Freedom Combat veteran, student, taxpayer, proud father of 4 amazing children, and a lucky husband to an outstanding mental health professional. I'm opposed to Bill 4624. I want each of you that are in favor of this bill today to examine your credentials and your education, then ask yourself if you treat these kind of patients of any kind. If the answer is no, that should be your response to this bill today. Point blank. I find this bill to be an egregious overreach by our government, endeavoring to control our state citizens and oppress yet another marginalized community. The American dream is for all people, not just those that attend church with or are closely related to our state's legislators. The promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is for everyone, no matter whether you agree with how they choose to live, how folks enjoy their liberty, or pursue their happiness, as long as they aren't infringing upon the rights of others the way that you're intending to do today. I joined the military in my youth to defend this country. I was deployed to fight religious extremism and help set up democracy in another country halfway across the globe, only to come home and now have to defend against a different faction of religious extremists in my own backyard. I swore an oath to fight enemies both foreign and domestic. My oath never expires. As long as you attempt to legislate and oppress the people of this state, I'll be here to fight you for their freedoms. Big government is not something that any of us want or need. The purpose of the government is to serve the people. I'm just one of many veterans that fought for the freedoms of the people that you intend to control with this atrocious piece of legislation. I recently visited our nation's capital and had the opportunity to see Arlington National Cemetery. I can attest to the fact that it is truly striking at the number of headstones that stretch across the landscape there. As a combat veteran and a very proud father of a trans child, I ask that you respect the sacrifices that were made in the name of freedom for this country and vote no for Bill H4624.
Eric, thank you for your testimony and service to our country. Are there any questions?
Your mic is not on.
Eric, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being here, Eric. Bill Key is next, and then we have Kelly Mayo on deck.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I should have corrected it. I am Dr. William Key. I am a clinical psychologist, but I'm here to speak to you as a father, a grandfather, and an uncle. My niece, Mary Lou, was a beautiful child who kept becoming depressed. She didn't understand what was going on. She said she didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to go out with boys, and nobody could understand until she finally shared with her mother that she thought she was a man. And imagine the surprise in the family, particularly when you have no training in mental health. How could anyone want to change something as basic as their gender? Just how do you understand that? It was very hard for the entire family, but our family decided to stand behind Mary Lou and her choices because we all spoke with her over many times, and we gave her the support. And luckily for Mary Lou, she lived in a state where she could get the medical treatment that she needed. Mary Lou is now very happily John. He is a man. He works in an emergency room. He helps people in emergency situations. He is a productive citizen and a happy man, and he is also married and now wants to foster children. So he wants to help make his country better and to help his community. Please oppose H4624 so that the citizens and the youth of South Carolina can have those choices and be the person who they feel they should be, not be told by someone else who they should or should not be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Key. Any questions for Dr. Key? Thank you again for being here. Kelly Mayo, and then we have Sally Willett.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much to those of you that are still with us, that are still listening. Thank you. My name is Kelly Mayo. I'm originally from Beaufort. I was born and raised there, and Columbia has been home for the last 22 years. I come to you as the mother of a trans child who was not always informed. I didn't know, and I said a lot of problematic things at one point, thinking that I was speaking the right thing. So I would encourage everyone to please do your own research. Look for it. It's all still very new research, but it's there. Decisions regarding physical and mental health should be between medical professionals and patients. Who are we to judge what is the best course of action? Educators, coaches, pastors, counselors, social workers, therapists are all resources for growth and development for our youth. By mandating the removal of confidentiality these crucial roles provide, we dispose of these protected relationships for an already marginalized group prone to depression, anxiety, and high rates of suicide. Who will our children turn to if they have unaccepting caregivers when they no longer have the privacy of trusted mentors? Hormone blockers simply press pause on puberty. They provide time to consider what's involved, what's best, time to research for a more enhanced perspective. Refusing the availability of hormone blockers to those under the age of 18 is a clear misunderstanding of the science of their crucial functionality. What harm is there in practicing the pause? Denying potentially life-saving healthcare services to those receiving Medicaid is discrimination. Why should an already othered group be pushed further towards life unexpected hardships? Thank you again for your time.
Kelly, thank you for your testimony. Right on time there. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Sally Willett and Jessica Spearman is on deck. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm from Pendleton, South Carolina, and I ask you to vote against House Bill 4624. I see my Rep. Cromer here today. This is my testimony. I was able to protect 4 kids pounding at my door running from a shooter, but I am struggling to protect my own kid from bills from our state legislatures. I don't think any of y'all understand the daunting task this is for us parents. As for me, going out in public has been difficult since 2016 when I experienced what no one should have to experience. I was a school counselor at Townville Elementary when a shooter drove onto the playground and fired his gun multiple times. I was in my office at the time and heard screams and banging of 4 first graders who had been separated from their class running away from the shooter. I hid them in my office with the lights off and pushing desks in the way of doors. I texted my family, and then I looked to see what I needed to do to keep those kids safe from anyone trying to hurt them. At that point, those children became my children, and I was ready to guard them with my life. I suffered PTSD as a result of the event. So coming to speak to you today is very tough for me. My voice may be shaky, but my resolve is clear. I grew up in South Carolina. My family has been in this state since the 1700s. I have lived and worked only in South Carolina my entire life. This state is my home, and there's never been a question of whether my family belonged here. Unfortunately, this legislative body is making it much more difficult for me to feel like South Carolina is a welcoming place. I have a child who is gender diverse and under the transgender umbrella. My child has been out for over 2 years, and this is a small part of who they are. They are also a straight-A student and an artist. They are thriving with the supportive family, teachers, coaches, as well as therapists and doctors who love my child as I do and work within their own organization's standard of care to provide the best health care possible. However, trans and diverse kids have been shown to be easy targets, and we know the real target is the entire LGBTQ community. I know this because instead of addressing gun violence, you are fast-tracking this bill. Every kid we sheltered at that shooting mattered. Jacob mattered. No matter where they were from or who they were, many adults performed some of the most heroic acts that day. So what do you think we do for our own kids to get them the care that every major medical association deems as safe and evidence-based? We do what we must do because our kids matter.
So thank you very much for your testimony. Jessica Spearman, and on deck is Liam Hine. David Wood, you're after Liam.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jessica Spearman. I'm a native of Anderson, South Carolina, a licensed professional counselor associate, a mom of 4 teenagers, one of which is trans, the wife of a combat veteran, and the founding president of PFLAG Anderson. I am in a unique position to love a trans adolescent and work professionally within the mental health field. Today, I am here in opposition of 4624. Like many other teens in this state, all 4 of my children have typical teenage concerns. However, legislators are only concerned with the daily health care of my trans child. Being a sophomore in high school, my trans child inquired of his government teacher, "How do you respect a government that wishes genocide on trans kids?" I cannot fathom the emotions felt by an educator having to speak to that level of questioning. Standing before you today, I cannot refute the negative impacts on South Carolina that 4624 will have, especially on mental health care. When limiting access to medically necessary treatment for trans individuals, you're inhibiting the ability of parents to make informed decisions based on evidence-based practices. Additionally, the forced outing of trans children by educators and mental health professionals puts them at an additional risk of abuse and neglect by their parents, overwhelming an already failing Department of Social Services. Lastly, as a professional and as a parent, I believe I have the choice of health care, that it is the choice of health care for my child is between our doctor and us as parents. My child is alive and thriving because he receives the care necessary. Please vote no on 4624.
That's good. That was perfectly timed. Thank you. Liam Hine and then David Wood. Mary Foster's after David.
Hello. Thank you for letting us talk to you today. I am a nurse with a doctorate who's worked in South Carolina for 16 years now. And I agree with all that's been said prior to me, so I won't repeat any of that. I mentor nurses, and I'm concerned, as our guidance counselor colleague spoke about, the ethics and how that will affect my profession. I'm currently helping work on our Code of Ethics revisions for our national organization. And as I look at this bill, which I clearly oppose, I see that we would be violating 4 provisions of 9 of the Nursing Code of Ethics if we were to actually apply what was proposed in this bill. In the first, I've also practiced as an advanced practice nurse in the past, and the same issues that our physician colleagues have brought up in terms of the best care for our patients, but also the forced outing would certainly violate at least two provisions of the nursing codes of ethics. And why that matters is that's what we are. That defines who we are as a profession, as the guidance counselors and as nurses. And we know we have a shortage in this state. To ask us to violate half of who we are we going to be actually bringing more nurses who want to be here? That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. David Wood and Mary Foster is afterwards.
Hi, my name is David, and I'm here today in opposition to H 4624. The LGBTQ community holds a special place in my heart, which is why I joined the PFLAG Greenville chapter and now serve as vice president. We dedicate our time to supporting individuals who have faced rejection, and we strive to foster understanding among loved ones. I come to you today asking you to show compassion. Research and real-life experiences we hear in support meetings reveal that LGBTQ people often face depression, anxiety, substance abuse, self-harm, bullying, and suicidal thoughts due to discrimination and stigma. Rather than make this problem worse, let's focus on pressing matters like mental health and housing. If a child develops a heart problem, we make an appointment with the pediatric cardiologist. If a bone is broken, an orthopedic surgeon is consulted. If a child suffers from gender dysphoria, the parents call their legislator. No, wait, we see how foolish that would be. Parents agonize over what to do because no one wants to see their child suffer. You can watch the self-esteem blossom for these individuals as they receive gender-affirming care. I cannot convey the extent to which politicians do not know these children and should not be allowed to make these decisions. It sounds like your legislators want more government control, less freedom, and less parental rights. Our legislators should view these brave youth as the wonderful individuals that they are. Energy spent in this area should aim to help and not harm. Decisions about this should rest with patients, their families, and medical providers, and not politicians. So today I urge you to vote no to H 4624 and to work instead to create a more inclusive and equitable South Carolina. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Thank you. Mary Foster, Emily Malkin is up next, and then Elizabeth Foster, you'll be following Emily. Mary, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I had prepared 3 minutes, and I've crossed things out, and I'm going to talk real fast. So here we go. My husband and I live in Beaufort, South Carolina. I've been there since 2004 and raised both of our children there. I had a lot of stuff where I was going to tell you about my family so that you would know that my family's probably a lot like yours. I'm going to cut all that and just tell you we love each other and we support each other. One thing that might be different, my son is transgender. It was 5 years ago this week when Knox was 15 years old that he told me he had gender dysphoria, or more simply that his insides did not match his outsides. And he couldn't reconcile how to exist that way. We loved and supported our child, but we still had a lot of questions and concerns. 5 years ago, we had the freedom to contact our pediatrician, a doctor who had cared for Knox since he was 1. She could direct us to a psychologist, a pediatric endocrinologist, and they spent lots of time answering our questions and determining the best course of treatment for Knox. Medical experts follow professional guidelines that we fully support. Their examinations and interactions with Knox were thorough and multi-stepped. They treated him using evidence-based protocols and constantly communicated with us and him to ensure that he was healthy and safe. I still do not fully understand why some people are born cisgender like me and some are born transgender like my son, but I've lived this. I really wish everybody on this subcommittee would make eye contact with me because this is my child I'm talking about. Thank you. I've lived this, and I've watched my child struggle with something unnamed for years and then flourish when he was finally able to live as his authentic self. It's okay if you don't understand or you're still unsure. But it is not okay to use your lack of experience or knowledge to punish people like my son or families like mine. Knox is alive and thriving because we were able to get him the care he needed. He's happy and whole, living his dream, studying at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. My family can serve as a model for what happens when parental rights remain intact, medical experts are accessible to all, and transgender children are seen, loved, and valued. Our story has a happy ending. Isn't that what we want for all the children in South Carolina? Last sentence. When we realized our daughter likely had ADHD, we sought medical help. That was our right and prerogative. The care for our son is no different. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your testimony. Emily Malkin? Did I get that right? Malkin?
Mayor. It's all right.
We'll go with, we're going to have your testimony right now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Mayer. Use she, her pronouns. I'm a former South Carolina public school teacher and a mother of two, and I'm here today to oppose House Bill 4624. Each of you in this room today are the recipients of gender-affirming care on a daily basis. When you order a meal and the server refers to you as sir or ma'am, each time you visit the doctor and they're familiar with your medical history and are well prepared to treat you. All of these are examples of daily occurrences where your gender is affirmed and you never have to think twice about it. I watched and listened last week as your colleagues in the Senate discussed the necessity for parents to have access and consent to their child's prescriptions under the premise that parents deserve to choose what is best for their children and deserve a say in their medical care. Parents knowing best has been a common theme in proposed legislation lately, from curriculum topics to vaccine choices or the multiple iterations of the Parental Bill of Rights that have been filed. But then why wouldn't parents know what's best when it comes to getting the care our children need, regardless of their gender identity? How can that double standard be held by this body and we justify this? It is an unpopular political battle that has been picked. Multiple studies have recently been released that show that the majority of people across the political spectrum support policies that protect the LGBTQ+ community. In fact, these numbers have increased over the last 7 years. So much so that Republican leaders, including former Governor Nikki Haley, have made headlines as of late for taking the stance that the government has no place in making these medical decisions. There are plenty of folks here today sharing their personal stories and their medical expertise. I am merely here to point out what is so clear. As a parent who loves my children deeply and trusts the medical professionals in our lives inherently, please empower and allow me to work with them as a team to make the decisions that are best for my child. There is no room for government in these conversations. And while the entirety of this bill is dangerous, the forced outing provision is specifically dangerous. As a former educator, I ask you to sit and reflect on what it would feel like to be in a room with a teacher that you trusted for the entirety of a year, and they had to break that trust. How much learning would be accomplished? When you force teachers to break the trust of their students, you're placing students in an unproductive learning environment. So today I'm asking you to realize that this is not your decision to make and vote against 4624. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Foster and Ashley Ladow is going to follow Elizabeth Foster. Absolutely, absolutely. Yep. And yep. Is this Elizabeth? Yep, yep. Thank you, Elizabeth. Take your time. Ashley? Lidow? Thank you very much. Jim? Guilfoyle? Guilfoyle. Sorry, Jim. I'm Mark Smith.
That's a tough one, too. Hi, I am Jim Guilfoyle, and I'm here today because my granddaughter is transgender. And there's nothing good in this bill for her or for the other youth of this state. A lot of what I was going to say has been said very eloquently, and I'm not going to try to repeat it, but I do want to stress the fact that when you take away the one positive option that these kids and their families have, you leave them with some awful, awful options involving pills, guns, nooses, razor blades. When you take away a parent's right to decide, you do terrible damage to that family. But the biggest thing I'd like to do today is find out why some of you people who support this bill support it. I can't believe that you're evil. There's got to be a reason. And I would love for you to contact me and tell me why it is you want to do this to these people. Again, my granddaughter is transgender, and I love her dearly. There's nothing in this bill that helps her. Everything in this bill hurts her. This is a terrible bill. I'm asking you to kill it right here in subcommittee. Vote no, please.
Thank you for your testimony. Alyssa Fuller and Lynn Teague is on deck. I've been notified, while you're walking up, Alyssa, I've been notified that those who told us they were in a waiting room, that all are in the room now. So if you know someone who is here that is not in the room, that is signed up to testify, please go ahead and have them get comfortable with the room and text them or call them or step out and ask them to come on in. We're down to about 13 folks, so thank you for that. Alyssa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to H4624. My name is Alyssa Fuller, and I'm here from Pickens, where I'm a constituent of Representative Hyatt. I run Camp Quest, a network of LGBTQ inclusive summer camps that primarily serves non-religious families nationwide. I serve on the board of Anderson PFLAG and Representative Beach's district, and I'm here today for American Atheists on behalf of its more than 500 constituents in South Carolina. I'm also a parent, a former teacher, and a non-binary queer person. Last night, I welcomed my first chance to speak directly with the Pickens County delegation about 4624. Halfway through public comments, Mr. Hyatt chose to leave, citing a church meeting that was more important than his secular duties of office. When I was 11 years old, I was falsely outed by a school teacher to my family before I was ready. My grandfather, a local church leader, picked up the phone. "I think Alyssa is a lesbian," said my teacher. "So what?" boomed my grandfather and slammed down the receiver. Luckily, I had a safe and loving family that didn't care who I had childhood crushes on. Many kids are not so lucky. And what if a teacher is wrong? Yesterday, I heard Representative Beach speak kindly and sincerely about the crisis of youth needing foster care in South Carolina. But did you know that a third of kids in foster care are LGBTQ, primarily from family rejection? The percentage of queer and trans youth in foster care is more than 3 times higher than in the general population. And because many foster parents and organizations that support foster care are aligned with discriminatory religious sects, LGBTQ foster youth are more likely to spend time and shuffled from one temporary home to the next. I have a few more stats on that, but I will save them. I do urge you to vote no.
Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Beach is recognized.
I just wanted to say thank you for coming down from Pickens. Thank you.
No problem. The weather was terrible.
Thank you for being here today. We appreciate that.
I would just like to say the study that I was quoting about foster care, if you're interested, is the Cuyahoga Youth Count, a report on LGBTQ youth and foster care done by the University of Maryland and in partnership with Cuyahoga, Ohio.
Thank you for citing that source.
Thank you.
Len is up next, and then we have Josh Malkin, thank you. I am not going to comment on anyone's handwriting, and mostly my ability to read those names. But Len, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm here for the League of Women Voters of South Carolina. The League supports equal rights for all persons, and we support access to quality medical care for all persons. This would prevent persons with gender dysphoria from exercising those rights to access appropriate medical treatments as defined by respected medical associations. The National Center for Biotechnology, the National Institutes of Health, has posted on gender dysphoria at the National Library of Medicine. They note that the World Professional Association for Transgender Health publishes the standards of care defining clinical guidelines for the care of transsexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming persons in order to maximize the health and well-being of patients with gender dysphoria. All treatment options should be offered. This bill would prevent persons under 18 from being offered that nationally accepted standard of care in South Carolina. It proposes very serious harm to persons with this condition. What we see in this bill is not small government. It is not respect for parental rights. It is not protection of persons with gender dysphoria. It is an attempt to force persons with this condition to conform to norms acceptable to a segment of society at immense cost to themselves. This is not the legitimate business of government, and this bill should be rejected. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you for your testimony and being here today. Josh. Vicky Ringer is up next after Josh. And Josh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you hearing everyone this afternoon. My name is Josh Melkin. I'm a lawyer with an advocacy strategist for the ACLU of South Carolina. I testify today in strongest opposition of House Bill 4624. South Carolina is not the first state to attempt to pass such legislation. Expensive lawsuits have been brought in response to similar bills across the country. Many federal courts have found that such restriction is an unconstitutional discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Fourth Appellate Circuit is the judicial body that governs South Carolina, and it has a history of respecting the privacy and autonomy of transgender individuals. The LGBTQ community has taught me the importance of finding joy in the darkest of moments. In that spirit, I want to celebrate so many of you who are here today. For decades, but the last few years especially, people in this room have worked tirelessly to create safe, helpful, and joyful spaces for a community constantly under siege from those who make little, if any, effort to hear or know them. These people put the safety and well-being of others about themselves, often at personal risks. Not all heroes wear capes. This bill tells a group of people that legislators don't think that they have the right to exist as their true selves. I cannot begin to imagine how parents and trans folks are feeling right now. I can hear them, I can hear their bravery, I can hear their compassion, I can hear their love, I can sympathize, I can't understand it. Please take a second to realize that you can't either. You cannot understand. We cannot understand the pain present in this room today. I cannot imagine you ran for office to contribute to the pain present in this room today. Hopefully you ran for office to serve your constituents. I promise this bill serves no one. Instead, it does unspeakable harm and furthers an agenda you likely don't believe in and realize you can't control. The fact that we're here today is unbelievably wrong. A vote for this bill ignores the medical standard of care, it ignores parents' rights to make healthcare decisions for their children, and it ignores basic human decency. I urge you to vote no to House Bill 4624. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the law or anything you'd like to know.
Thank you. Representative Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for being here today. Again, the point I want to raise, and I stepped outside to ask some folks that know the law better than me, so it's good to talk to an attorney right now on the record. Help me understand, because I'm getting some conflicting understanding of this, what this bill does. So as I'm reading the bill, my understanding of it is where it says, knowingly engage in conduct that aids and abet the provision goes so on and so forth about the transition procedure. What's concerning with me is that's when it talks about physicians and mental health providers, right?
Yep.
And so from your understanding of the bill, being an attorney, if a mental health provider is providing mental health counseling for a child that's potentially transitioning, they go from their pediatrician Then the pediatrician potentially refers it to a mental health professional. That's their expertise. And then the mental health provider then potentially takes it to the next step based on the standard of care. If this was the law, would that, the way this is currently written, would that mental health professional potentially be subject to criminal liability?
Representative Moore, thank you. That's the way I read this bill, and I will tell you the Eighth Circuit, which covers Arkansas, doctors brought a First Amendment claim claiming that a very similar provision was viewpoint-based discrimination, and that claim was upheld. That law has been enjoined, hasn't been allowed to go into effect.
Any further questions, Representative? Thanks for hanging with us. Please continue.
I just want to just get clarity for the record.
Sure.
From the way that you're reading the bill, is there any criminal liability in this bill?
I would need to take another look at the bill. I believe there are provisions about licensure, that you can lose your license. Is that correct?
So there is criminal liability?
Well, I don't know if criminal, I don't know if there's any felony provision, but I mean, losing your medical licenses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're all set. Thank you for your testimony, Josh. Vicki Ringer and Steve Nussum is on deck. Vicki, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm Vicki Ringer. I've not prepared any formal remarks, but I would just like to say, as so many have said before, I know I'm not going to provide new information. The makeup of the board indicates that nothing I say will matter. The fact that we have a full committee meeting tomorrow suggests the same. But this is harmful. There is so much that needs to be done for the benefit of the kids in the state. So to tell me you're protecting kids is such a falsity. It is not true. You are hurting kids. Listen to the parents. Listen to the doctors. You're dictating the practice of medicine, and there is malpractice involved in what you're prescribing. So take more time and talk to these doctors. They know what they're doing. This whole suggestion of a transgender ideology, like it's some nasty thing that's going on. As the Bells testified, as others have testified, this is not a journey anyone wants for their kids. Look at you and what you're doing to the kids. Nobody wants that for them. So listen to the people who are impacted and get out of your mind the far reaches, the polarizing comments on the far right. Listen to mainstream Americans, doctors, and parents. They know best what's right for their kids, and you tell us that every day. They know what's best. Listen to them now. Thank you.
Vicki, thank you for your testimony. Steve Nussum is next, and we will. Yep, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Steve Newsom. I'm a former English and research teacher. I taught for 16 years in South Carolina public schools. I'm from Columbia. Here today to speak in opposition to H 4624. I think the medical aspect of the bill has been very well covered by experts, and I stand with them. If their testimony doesn't persuade you, I don't know what possibly could. We've heard one person speak in favor of this, and that person was not a medical expert. But as a teacher, I can speak specifically to the language at the end of the bill, which requires school staff to out students. I strongly support the rights of parents, but in real life, there are no absolutes. I recall in 2020 many impassioned arguments, including by some people in this room, that we needed to physically reopen schools because parental neglect and abuse were not being reported. Those were valid concerns, and they illustrate that school staff, as mandated reporters, are formally tasked with identifying and responding to child abuse and neglect. In July 2020, for example, according to WBTW and other news sources, child abuse and neglect reports were down significantly. According to Governor McMaster, this was because children were not in schools to file complaints. Quote, "We suspect incidents have gone up during this time, but the children are not in schools to report them," he said. So many of us are deeply worried about the increased both in reported abuse cases and reports of student self-harm and suicide. Teachers and staff are trained to recognize unhealthy situations for our students. While most parents and guardians are supportive and caring and want what is best for students, there are those who would harm students and do harm students if those students share that they are transgender. Teachers should always try their best to include parents, and ideally parents would know everything about their kids and be supportive. Most parents do know their kids well and have their trust. Most support their students, guide their educations, and keep them safe and healthy. But at times, we need to be able to exercise our professional discretion when it comes to sharing information which could lead to students being harmed or abandoned. And I have a lot of personal experience with that. I know I don't have time to share, but those aren't just kind of empty stats. I know students who will be harmed by this, so I would urge you to please stop it in committee. Thank you.
Steve, would you take questions?
Of course.
And thank you for your time in the classroom and your testimony. Representative Beach?
Good, sir. I'd like to pose the question I asked the last educator is if this becomes law, out of the faculty at school, who would be the best person to contact the parent?
I'm not really sure I understand that question. You mean the best in terms of, like, ethically the best, or?
Well, the bill's requiring that somebody from the school has to reach out to the parents of the child.
Right.
It mentions teachers and things of that nature. I'm assuming that teachers come from all walks of life and backgrounds. This is you would say a hot potato, and this issue.
Yeah.
And I've been reached out by from other educators, and their concern is they don't want to get in the middle of all this. They just want to stick to math and science and things of that nature. But the law is a law, and I'm just thinking forward. And this is a conversation I would like to have with my colleagues about the last paragraph on this bill. I believe strongly that this school needs to notify the parents. However, my question is.
And Mr. Beach, I'm just going to remind you, this is your question for the person testifying, not the committee.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. My question to you, sir, is pretty simple. If this is required by law, who is the best person in the school to contact the parents? Thank you.
Well, again, I can only speak to what I think is ethically right. I think ethically, this is a case-by-case thing. A big problem with a lot of the education-related legislation that's been proposed this session or that's been carried over from last session is that it tries to take all of the 800,000 students in South Carolina who attend public schools and put them in this one box. There are times when it would be appropriate for a teacher or an administrator or a guidance counselor to share information with parents, and there are times when it's not. I think trying to make it this black or white issue is kind of absurd on its face. If a student came to you and said, if you tell my parent that that I got a D on this math quiz, my parent will break my leg, then you'd have to make a professional decision about whether or not you thought it was valuable enough for the parent to have that information that you would risk that possible harm, and if that possible harm was real or if the student's making it up. And again, the state has required teachers and guidance counselors and administrators to be in the position of making that decision because we are legally mandated reporters when it comes to abuse and neglect. So the idea that we can say with any piece of legislation, in this situation, this should always be reported, especially when it's a mental health issue, as we've heard from all these experts, I think the question on its face is kind of flawed, respectfully. The bill language shouldn't be in there. I'm not in support of any part of this bill, but again, I can only speak to my experience as an educator, and most things we do share with parents, but there have been times where if I shared information with parents, I was putting a student at risk. And I really can't understand why anybody would support that as a blanket requirement. And again, that's something that this body has acknowledged over and over again. We did a cost-benefit analysis in 2020 and decided it was more important to go back to school and risk students getting COVID than it was to risk losing out on those reports of abuse and neglect. So are we saying now that parents aren't capable of abuse and neglect, or that teachers shouldn't be involved in that? Because if that's the case, why do we have these mandated reported laws? So I hope that answers your question. I'm not in support of this bill.
Thank you for that. Any further questions in the committee? Thank you again for being here today, Steve. I want to circle back. Elizabeth, would you like to come forward and speak to us? Thank you so much for, I know you've sat here through the day and know that we appreciate you. Elizabeth Foster? And the podium is microphone. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Foster, and I'm currently a freshman at Georgetown University. But I spent the first 18 and a half years of my life in Beaufort, South Carolina. And I also happen to be the proud sister to a transgender brother. When my brother Knox came out as transgender 5 years ago, it was certainly not a result of peer pressure. It didn't make him more popular, he didn't make a bunch of new friends, and he didn't fit in better with the friends that he did have. For the most part, he was alienated from his peers. Some students poked fun at him, and others provoked arguments with him about the validity of his identity. As Knox's little sister, I overheard and often cried over the comments that people knew better than to say to his face. Considering what people felt comfortable saying around me, I would never want to know what they said when I wasn't around. It seemed like people were invalidating Knox's identity from every direction. And yet, anyone who knew Knox would swear to you that his happiness increased tenfold overnight once he came out. He was friendlier, funnier, chattier, and so much more confident. He was nicer to me and my friends. I saw a positively giddy side of him for the first time. The joy that resulted from Knox finally being able to live fully and honestly in his true identity was undeniable, even though there were zero social incentives for Knox to come out. He knew that telling us the truth, that he had been struggling with his identity, and after a few years of research thought he might finally know why he'd always felt something was off, would mean being able to talk to a professional to explore the concept of gender dysphoria and learn about therapy options. After about 4 years since the last time he'd worn a dress or sported a haircut longer than a pixie cut, Knox was able to receive counseling and hormone therapy to affirm the identity that he had known was his for years. Withstanding the taunting and blatant disrespect that followed Knox's coming out was made infinitely easier knowing that his honesty would allow him to receive life-saving care. In a world that constantly insults, vilifies, and invalidates young trans people, it is the absolute least you can do to ensure that they are still respected and affirmed by their healthcare providers. Age 4624 sends the broader message that people like my brother are undeserving of the pure joy that comes from being able to live as one's true self. This joy is not in any way harmful or dangerous to any of you or any other South Carolinians. It is innocent and beautiful and should be valued just the same as any other child's happiness. Thank you.
Ms. Foster, thank you for mustling up the courage to come up and give your testimony. All of our committee members, thank you. And I might add, it is my personal opinion that you honor your brother and your family by being here and your testimony, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Before I turn the page, I just want to confirm, Ashley, you want to give me a nod, or are you?
Mr. Chairman, the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network is in firm opposition to this bill, and you know that.
Thank you. And next we have, folks, we have 5 testimonies left for time planning purposes. Committee members, we're going to hear next from Joanna Haynes, and then Cal Boyce is next. Joanna, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for hearing us. My name is Johanna Haynes. I'm at LISWAPCP. I am currently the CEO of a community health center in Conway, South Carolina, called Care Team Plus. Thank you for listening to all of us in opposition of this bill. Instead of focusing on the needs of our state, you are focused on taking away the parental rights to work, parents' rights to work with their children, doctors, mental health professionals, including their psychiatrists, to meet the physical and psychological needs of their children. 1 in 5,000 infants are born with ambiguous genitalia. Rarely are chromosomal tests completed when sexual ambiguity is not visibly obvious. No one should have to provide chromosomal tests to the government to receive gender-affirming care, taking away parental rights to provide medical decisions and care for their children with a bill that has no basis or grounds in medical literature or science is immoral. This bill is based on fear of the unknown, uneducated opinion, and some definitions of religious morality, the kind of tyranny that the original immigrants from Europe came here to escape. Religious imposition through law is unconscionable. If you are still voting yes for this bill, you have not been listening. I am entertained by TV. I don't know who the TV guy was. Not informed by it. I do my own research and fact-checking. As a matter of fact, I have my own research to quote. The NIH reveals that there have been reports of heart attack, stroke, irregular heartbeat, bleeding in the brain or lungs, high blood pressure, and sudden death to men who take Viagra. Millions of men still take Viagra for their psychological health. To answer a question that was not mine but was to someone ahead of me, I would say, as an LISWAPCP who worked very hard and paid a lot of money for that degree, if a student gave me that information and was not ready to tell their parents, if they were, I would sit there with them and do it. If they were not, I would give up my license and run for this office to stop this BS.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Very good. Cal is up next, and then Matthew Butler is on deck. Cal, the floor is yours.
I testified against the subcommittee against a similar bill back in March of last year, and I feel like no one listened then, and I hope people are listening now. And if you're not listening, I'm not going to sit in a room for 4 hours just to have no one listen to anyone who comes, and I'm just going to stop showing up to things like this and figure out how to get things working in my own way rather than just coming and sitting in a room with people not listening. It seems like people are listening. Trans people are humans. We're people just like you are. We're kids just like you are. We grow up with our families the same way that you are. We're same in that we're different. Everyone's different. And it's not your job to figure out how people need to live their lives. It's not my job to tell you how to live your life. And so I hope that you would vote no on this bill and let trans people be people just the way that everyone else is a person. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Matthew Butler is next. Veronica Walters is on deck. Matthew, we appreciate your hanging in there with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and ladies and gentlemen of the subcommittee. Good evening. My name is Matthew Butler. I'm a resident of West Columbia, South Carolina, House District 89 and Senate District 26. I come to you this evening to share testimony in opposition to House Bill, Leadership Bill, H4624. It's with great sadness that I see the majority party foisting upon such a vulnerable population today additional hardship by way of this bill. And why? Gender-affirming care for trans youth is medically necessary care for trans youth, is life-affirming and life-saving care for trans youth in a state where many of these youth are in a minority of a minority, and for good measure, and even further minority just for having parents who do love them, and where there are already so many hurdles and hoops for these families to jump through to provide the care that we currently do provide, it's patently cruel. The question is why the majority party pursuing such a harmful policy that is directed against such an incredibly small population. I'd posit it's because the majority party has become a victim of your own success. After 20 years of single-party rule, the majority party has ceded to control to its most extreme wing and its most harmful impulses. George Washington himself warned about this in his farewell address. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. Further, he said that he said about this that it serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one party against another. I suppose that's why we have members of that faction of the majority party saying, in part, after fully embracing what President Washington warned against, bullying institutions and such a small population. Mr. Beach, here present, may recognize his own words as printed in the Post and Courier of Charleston from December 6, 2023. I went after the Medical Center of South Carolina with 19 other of my door-kicking, rock-ribbed, and South Carolina's most conservative legislative friends, and it feels good to be a gangster. Gangster on medical providers working in concert with such a small group of loving families. Gangster on children.
Thank you.
If
for
this
your
is why you're
testimony,
considering
Matthew.
rushing this legislation through to heat the bodies of these young people of South Carolina on the pyre of electoral show to keep the hordes that you've created yourself at bay for the slightest partisan advantage of your primary in June, shame on all of you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Butler, and we appreciate folks. We'll have no applause if y'all don't. If you remember, we set the decorum up, and we're on the 2 testimonies left, and this decorum has been amazing. Let's continue with 2 more testimonies and show everyone the same level of respect, and thank you very much. Next, we have Veronica and T. King. You will close us out and be speaker number 48. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Veronica Walters, the floor is yours, and we welcome you.
Thank you for letting me address this subcommittee this evening. My name is Veronica Walters. I'm a board member of South Carolina Equality. I'm also the president of Tea Time Transgender Support, which is a nonprofit in Myrtle Beach and Florence that holds support group meetings, including those for trans youth and their families. And I can tell you that this bill would negatively impact them and our community. This bill purports to be in protection of trans youth and their parents. Yet, it ignores the preponderance of decades of treatment and the evidence of that treatment and the standards of care that are approved by every major medical association in this country. And yet, here I see something somebody saw in 60 Minutes or some obscure foreign survey given weight. This bill also inserts government between the parents and the medical providers and the proper treatment that they've deemed for their trans youth, their children, that they want the best for. Also, by this mandated outing of trans youth, you put at risk the very lives, in some cases, of transgender youth. And to make that a mandatory thing rather than to have a truthful discussion is wrong. But the most important thing that this bill does is take away hope, because it takes away hope from parents to be able to provide for their children a healthy and beneficial development. And it takes away the hope of trans youth from becoming an equal and productive citizen and healthy citizen in this state.
Veronica, thank you
and that's
so
the
very
tragedy
much.
of this bill.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. T. King, welcome, and you have the distinct honor of being presenter speaker number 48 and the last presenter. And we welcome you.
I'm either first or last in everything. Okay.
Welcome.
Well, I'm T. King. I'm from Myrtle Beach area. Originally from Aiken and so forth. I take it that everybody that's left here are doctors because they didn't need to hear any of this, or most of it. So I'm sure there's not been very few questions here. I came out in 1957 as transgender. Me and my little 55 Chevy. I got stopped by a cop. He didn't like my looks, I guess. But whatever. I didn't go to jail because that's what happened back in those days. I didn't go to the institution like Chattahoochee or someplace. I didn't have, my brain scrambled and all of this. That's happened. That happened. I grew up through integration. I grew up through a lot of this stuff. You don't even know that the South almost seceded from the Union again. But I was in government. And believe me, you did. It's so funny to be able to hear all of these people get up here and tell you their stories. And it's just bouncing off most of you. I am really, I'm over 80 years old, and I went through hell to get here. And I'm suffering right now, but I'm here to the last. And some of these people, some of our representatives can't even stay here halfway through. I'm sorry, but are you all of these people are sick? I mean, it's just absurd. I'm sorry. But
your last comment?
Yes, last comment. You'll never know the hell that we have to go through. And believe me, we do not choose to do this. I never chose to be a woman. Who in the hell would?
T, thank you for your testimony, and we appreciate you being here today, and I will certainly allow that last applause. I'm looking at my phone here. It's 5:41. We started at about 10 minutes late, so we've been at this for about 3 hours. Committee members, I'm not going to defer to staff or anyone to my left or right. I'm going to declare a 10-minute break, and we will begin the next portion of this meeting, which will be the committee discussions, and we'll take up any amendments that are on the floor, and we'll continue staff discussions. And I just would want to say, because of my fellow colleagues in the House, this room was filled with fellow members from the House who are not on this subcommittee. So the subcommittee members who are part of this committee who will be voting here today are present. So thank you for that clarification, and we stand adjourned for 10 minutes. Recess. Thank you very much. We are calling the meeting back into session for the Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee, and we are at the portion now for amendments could be offered and committee members being able to have discussions on the bill and if there's going to be any action on the bill. And committee members, before I get into that, because I did get a couple questions asked of me during the break, if I may, gentle reminders of the process. So amendments can be made here in the subcommittee meeting, and I've been alerted there are 2 or 3 amendments, and so we took a little extra time there for some printing of one of those. So thank you for your grace on that extra time there. We then will have full committee. Should the bill get voted up, there can be more amendments in a full committee meeting. A bill can be modified in full committee meeting. Should a bill pass full committee meeting, then it goes to the floor. And again, that's when all of the House members have an opportunity to speak on the bill. And bills, as many of you know, can also be amended on the floor. So every bill that goes through the House in both chambers is a work in progress until the final votes are called. So thank you very much. At this point, are there any housekeeping items, staff members, that I've not covered that we want to make sure we address? Thank you, Representative Moore. Let's, if I can call on staff to read the First Amendment as submitted, and then we'll hear from the representatives who are sponsoring those for any further clarifications and comments before discussions. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beach has withdrawn amendment number 1. Amendment number 2 is presented by Mr. Smith. It relates to section 2 of the bill, expressly striking subsection B of section 2 of the bill. Subsection B reads that a teacher, school administrator, or other school employee who has reason to believe or knows that a student suffers from gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, or other psychological conditions that can result in a person identifying with a gender different than that of their sex, as defined in section 44-42-310, must notify the student's parent or legal guardian. Again, Mr. Smith's amendment would strike that provision from the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further comments on as that's read, so striking section B under section 2. Any discussion, comments on that amendment? What's the pleasure of the subcommittee?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Davis.
Thank you. I move that we pass this amendment favorably and recommend that it goes to the full committee.
We have a motion and a second, and we know that seconds aren't required for amendments, but we take that under consideration. Thank you. And we'll call the roll on that First Amendment.
Representative Beach,
No.
Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Moore,
No.
Representative Petalino,
Yes.
Representative Sessions,
Yes.
Representative Smith.
Yes.
The amendment passes 4-2.
Our First Amendment passes 4-2, which strikes section B. Is there Second Amendment that we have?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Representative Moore, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seeing that the motion just passed to strike in section 2, part B, I ask that we strike out all of section 2. I make that motion.
Question's been raised to amend Amendment 1 to strike the remaining sections of Section 2, which would include Section 593236, A, 1, and 2. Is that your motion, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any discussions or questions regarding that motion? Madam Chair, Davis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if we can amend an amendment, because that's technically what we're doing here.
That's right.
I just want to make sure that we're following our rules and protocol.
Thank you. I'm just going to consult to council. It is wonderful having two attorneys on this subcommittee.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah. So, Trey, could you clarify that Representative Moore's amendment would not be amending the First Amendment, it would be a Second Amendment, is what you offered. Is that correct, Representative Moore?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Any further clarification on that?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Clear as mud. So we have a Second Amendment on the floor, and that is to strike Section 2, Chapter 32, Title 59, in its entirety.
Well, Mr. Chairman, of that because now the First Amendment took B out, so now it's my amendment is to strike Section 2, A1 and A2.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and you were recognized, of course. And that would be the remaining portion of that section. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think, is everyone clear what the amendment is? There's a motion on the floor. Are there any further comments, concerns, allegations, anything? Very good. Let's call the roll.
Yeah, so I go. Yes.
Yep. Correct.
We'll have to,
Yep.
yeah, I make a motion to favorably recommend this amendment.
Very good. We have a motion on the floor. We'll call the roll.
Mr. Beach?
No.
Ms. Davis?
No.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Petalino?
No.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No.
The bill, I'm sorry, the amendment fails.
Thank you. Amendment number 2 fails. I believe there is a third amendment that we have been notified of. Members, you're getting a hard copy of this. And after circulated, Trey, would you read that amendment? Trey, please review this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendment number 3 is offered by Representative Sessions. It pertains to Section 4442-320, Section B, by striking language stating knowingly or in conduct that aids or abets, so that the section would now read, a physician, mental health provider, or other healthcare professional shall not engage in the provision or performance of gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age. This section may not be construed to impose liability on any speech protected by federal or state law. It would also add a subsection D to this section by stating that nothing in this section prohibits a mental health provider from offering mental health services.
Thank you for that, Trey. Representative Sessions, as the author of this, you want to offer comments on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. After hearing testimony today, I hear what you're saying, and I wanted to make sure we're clarifying what the intent of this bill is. And speaking to other members of the subcommittee, we just wanted to make crystal clear an aid and abet, striking that would do that. So, and then also adding the subsection D, nothing in the section prohibits a mental health provider from offering mental health services. We want to make sure that that is simply stated in this bill. We do not want to prohibit folks under the age of 18 who are experiencing any sort of mental stress to not have mental health support. Thank you.
Committee members, any further comments, questions of Representative Sessions on this amendment? What's the pleasure?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to vote on this amendment and move it to vote in favor.
We We have a motion on the floor for amendment number 3. Let's call the roll.
Mr. Beach?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Petalino?
Yes.
Mr. Sessions?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
The amendment passes with all in favor.
Amendment number 3 passes. Staff, are we aware, have we been given any other amendments in writing?
No other amendments at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Committee members, any comments? Additional amendments? And what's the pleasure of the committee? Hearing no further comments, what's the
Mr.
motion?
Chairman.
We now have been signified of a comment. Representative Moore, you are recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we need a little more time with this, and I don't think we need to move forward to putting this in full committee. So I would I'll make the motion that we reconsider this and come back tomorrow for further discussion on this in subcommittee, and not take a vote tonight.
Representative Moore, are you making a motion to adjourn debate?
I am.
There is a motion to adjourn debate. Are there any comments on that? What is the, we have an adjourn debate motion, so we'll call the roll.
Mr. Beach?
No.
Ms. Davis?
No.
Mr. Moore?
Of course.
Ms. Petalino?
No.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No.
The amendment fails.
The motion.
I'm sorry. The motion fails. I'm tired, y'all. I'm sorry.
No apology necessary. We're all in this together. Is there any other motion from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to.
Mr.
Chair, I'd
Sessions,
like
you are
to-
recognized.
To move the bill as amended.
There is a motion to favorably recommend to the full committee
As
for the
amended.
bill as amended.
Yes, sir.
That does not require a second. We're amending the bill, so we need a second on that. That's right. We have a second on that. We'll call the roll.
Mr. Beach?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
No.
Ms. Petalino?
Yes.
Mr. Sessions?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
The bill passes favorably as amended.
Thank you. The committee hearing for tomorrow is scheduled for 10 a.m. Tomorrow for anyone who would like to come and hear and be a part of the full committee meeting tomorrow. And so with no further items before us, we are adjourned.
Hey, Pete, go fuck yourself.
Thank you,
Yeah, no, it's a good thing. Started a couple months ago, but finally, really getting rolling with the session.
Good to see you, man.
Hey, can we make a hold?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.